7 years ago, on the day of the disaster, the city lived its own life. Noticing the red light, the girl turned around. Then the horror called the dungeon breakthrough began, after which monsters began to emerge from their portals, and as a result of the incident, many people died. Trying to escape from the monsters, they zealously called for help. Looking at the bloody photo of his family, the protagonist noted that his parents were also gone then, and that day he lost everything in an instant. The protagonist clenched his teeth tightly while bloody tears flowed from his eyes. He swore that he would definitely become a hunter and tear all the monsters to shreds. 7 years later, the memorial park of the disaster. A guy was sitting on a bench with a travel bag, mentally noting that he was kicked out of the hunter training center. Looking with blue eyes, he asked what kind of hunter he was. A male voice addressed the member Han Sunjun, noting that he wanted to tell him directly. Looking at the brunette in front of him, the man told him not to come to the hunter training center anymore. Frowning, the protagonist asked what was wrong and why he was being kicked out. The tall man ran his hand through his hair and said that he knew that a normal awakened only needed a few months to complete the training at the training center to become a hunter. Looking down at the guy, he noted that however, the problem was that he had been here for 7 years. The brunette looked at him from under his brows with displeasure. The coach frowned and said that since it had come to this, he wanted to be honest, noting that he had no talent at all and, in a word, was just trash. Sunjun listened with shock in his eyes to his words about how if they allowed him to stay here, the image of their center would also become shitty. The other participants gathered behind him, and someone said that when they saw him coming and training every morning, his tenacity was amazing and they even felt sorry for him. His comrade noted that there was no need to feel sorry for him, because he was a fool who did not know his place. Standing aside, the guy listened to his question about how it was even possible that after 7 years of training, his stats had not increased. The brunette sharply squeezed the tin can with the drink. Biting his lower lip, he mentally asked that if we do not even talk about opening unique characteristics and acquiring skills, why did not even the stats increase? Sitting on a bench, the main character heard a question from the side. Did she remember how dad died? A woman with a child was standing aside, who said that he knew and remembered everything. The girl with a helmet on her head smiled and said that when the monsters attacked, dad fearlessly died, saving people until the very end. Her mother sat on her knees, saying that everything was right, and then asked what to do if difficulties arise in life in the future. The child replied that she needed to gather her courage up. Sunjun's eyes widened as the girl exclaimed that she should never give up. The mother hugged her child and praised her. Suddenly, they perked up, looking to the side. A boy stood next to them, bowing. A moment later, he took off as soon as the woman tried to find out who he was. Rushing forward, the brunette thought that it was true that 7 years had passed. As a drop of sweat ran down his cheek, he noted that he couldn't just give up like that. Running across the square, he mentally exclaimed that he would never give up. After a while, it began to rain. The protagonist knocked on the front door. A few moments later, it opened. A large man appeared, asking the participant to leave. Standing in front of him, Sunjun asked him to help him pass the hunter exam one last time because he couldn't give up like this. The man fell silent. Frowning and baring his teeth, he called the guy a piece of shit and asked why he still couldn't understand. The brunette opened his mouth in shock. The curator poked his finger at his shoulder, asking if he had come to forcefully return the money he had wasted, and then asked if he would calm down if he simply returned half of it. The protagonist muttered that it wasn't so. Opening his mouth wide, he shouted that it wasn't about the money at all. Receiving a sharp blow to the face, he began to fall backwards. Sunjun landed on garbage bags and bins. Turning to the door, the man smirked and asked him not to lie at least to him. Looking at the guy, he called him scum. The brunette wilted, sitting in the rain in the garbage bags. Looking down with a gloomy gaze, he thought that if only he had a unique characteristic too. Without getting up from his seat, the protagonist thought that if he had even a little talent, then a small drop fell into the water. A blue sign appeared with the words that the trial tower praised him for his iron will. Sunjun, who found himself in the water, opened his eyes wide, wondering who was praising him. He began to be pulled into a puddle of rainwater. Looking with frightened eyes, the guy indignantly asked what was happening now. A loud scream was heard throughout the area. The curator ran out of the house, ordering him to shut up. However, there was no one near the garbage bags anymore. He looked around, picking up the brunette's cap. Throwing it into the trash can, the scythe called him a weakling. Meanwhile, the protagonist fell into the abyss of water. Puffing out his cheeks, he tried to hold his breath. Suddenly, the water threw him out and he began to fall down. A blue screen appeared in front of the protagonist, which said that the test tower had selected all suitable candidates from Earth. Reading the text, Sunjun wondered if this was the second disaster. His eyes widened when he was asked to choose a difficulty level, noting that the reward he would receive would depend on it. Biting his lip, the guy thought that he did not understand what was happening now, but looking at the 3 difficulty levels, he mentally noted that his intuition told him to use this chance. The brunette pressed the button. Suddenly, his cool bright light. The system noted that it hoped that he would receive a satisfactory result from the suffering he received, and then it was said that he would soon go down to the first floor of the test tower. The protagonist looked with surprised eyes. The system noted that all the statuses of taxes and injuries of the candidate were currently being healed, after which the loading of the first floor of the test tower began, for which he needed to prepare. Sun Ji-yoon found himself in the desert. His eyes widened. A notification about issuing a weapon appeared on the blue screen, after which a sword appeared. It pierced the sand in front of the guy. The system noted that the theme of this trial was survival, the reward for which was unlocked unique characteristics. After reading this, the brunette froze in shock. Remembering how he trained in the center, he thought that he would receive what he had worked so hard to obtain for the past 7 years. Smiling like a madman, the protagonist thought that this was just madness. He walked towards the sword. Suddenly, the sand under his feet shook. Falling forward, Sun Ji-yoon loudly asked what was happening right now. Horror froze in his eyes when the system noted that the training trial was about to begin, and the selected difficulty in the Tower of Trials was hard. A huge sand golem appeared above the brunette. Looking up at it, he noted that he could not believe it. The notification said that he needed to survive for a limited time, and his remaining time was 9 minutes 58 seconds. Sun Ji-yoon began to run away from the golem. A blue screen appeared in front of his face. Horror froze on his face. It was noted that the punishment for failing the test was death. Loudly, the boy ran along the sand. Looking back sideways, he wondered if he could really escape from it like this. Looking at the running monster, he thought that it was faster than he thought. Stepping on the sand, the brunette mentally noted that it was because of him that it was impossible to run for 9 minutes without rest with his endurance. The protagonist continued to rush forward. Squeezing the hilt of the sword, he mentally noted that the system even gave him a weapon ordered him to survive, so he did not have a rich choice. Without slowing down, Sun Ji-yoon thought that either he would die here trying to escape or die in battle. Dedication. Looking back, he wondered how he could defeat this creature. Suddenly, he remembered the gloomy faces that called him a fool who does not know his place. Opening his mouth, the guy thought that this was enough. It was as if the curator was slapping him with a cone, saying that he was just a worthless person. Gritting his teeth tightly, the protagonist wondered what would happen if he tried to run away now. Jumping to the side, he thought that he could not allow this to happen. The brunette, tightly clutching his sword, thought that he had been trying to become a hunter for 7 years, and when it came to theory, he could say that he knew more about his feat than other hunters. He thought that running away was not an option, and he needed another way. Thinking about the monster that was still rushing after him, the protagonist mentally noted that usually, monsters like him would stop moving if they destroyed the core. Climbing the mountain of sand, he thought that however, the core was usually in hard to reach places. Heading to the top, Sun Ji-yoon thought that if so, he pressed himself into the sand again. Jumping forward, the guy thought he would just make it easy. He did a somersault with his sword catching on the sand. The brunette slowly went down. The golem jumped after him and fell. It started to roll down the slope. The protagonist lowered it to him. Jumping up, he realized that now was the time. Finding himself on the golem, Sun Ji-yoon spun that he could reach it. He smiled smugly. After that, he hit the core on his chest. The sword slightly cut the stone. The guy's mouth opened in shock as the sword was thrown back in his hands. There was a small crack on the core. When the monster smiled, he thought that this core was much stronger than it looked. Gritting his teeth tightly, the brunette cursed with a frightened face. He swung again, thinking that if he could hit again. A huge hand grabbed him. Opening his mouth, the protagonist screamed loudly, thinking that he knew it. The golem brought it close to his face and he began to hear words about how he was worthless, pathetic, and just a fool who did not understand his place. Sun Ji-yoon tightly gripped the hilt of his sword with a bloody hand. Fury flashed in his eyes as he ordered all the voices to be silent. Throwing the sword, he angrily repeated. The blade hit the core. The golem opened its mouth in confusion and the system noted the destruction of his words. A piece of the monster with Siemens began to fall. A notification appeared saying that the remaining time was 7 minutes 8 seconds, and that he had completed the training test. The monster began to fall apart. After a while, Sun Ji-yoon ran in a pile of sand. Starting to rise, he wondered if he really did it. He knelt down, trying to figure out if he really saw this sand golem. The guy smiled contentedly, thinking that he really defeated it. He stood up, and the system congratulated him on successfully spawning the first floor of the trial tower. The brunette noted that he was able to survive. The information on the blue screen said that as a reward for clearing, he would receive a unique characteristic. As a reward, he would receive 1,000 points, and as an additional reward, he would receive the skill Quick Recovery of rank E+ and 500 points. The protagonist's mouth fell open in surprise. Standing in front of the screen, he mentally said that he could not believe it. Looking at his hands and imagining many gloomy faces, he thought that he had put in a lot of effort over the past 7 years, and the only thing he received in return was disdain and ridicule. He was notified of the unlocking of the unique characteristic Necromancy rank F. Sun Ji-eun froze, mentally noting that now he could become a hunter. However, sadly lowering his eyes, he thought that all this would only happen if he survived. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Seeing the red and black clot of energy in front of him, the brunette wondered what it was. Holding his injured shoulder, he asked if it was true that a black fog had appeared where the golem had died. He touched it. Tablets appeared with words stating that his unique characteristic had been activated, and then he was asked if he wanted to absorb the soul of the sealed golem. Looking with shocked eyes, Sun Ji-eun wondered if this black fog was his unique characteristic. He pressed the button with a positive answer. Shreds of energy began to emerge from the core, heading towards the guy. His eyes widened in surprise. A blue tablet appeared with words stating that he had absorbed the soul of the sand golem, and that his skill had increased by 7%. The guy bent over and froze. He looked at his hands with puzzled eyes. Suddenly, bloody energy began to seep into his chest. He breathed heavily until it sank completely. A notification appeared that the number of souls was a 5th. Imagining the core, the brunette thought that he could feel this soul, and then wondered if this meant that he could store souls if he absorbed them. He closed his eyes, thinking that if he were to use it like this. The system noted that he could increase his stats by absorbing. Strength was increased by 3, and endurance by 2. The protagonist began to float above the ground. Opening his mouth in surprise, he thought that he felt like energy was filling his body. He mentally noted that his stats had indeed increased. Remembering how he was kneeling in the training room, Sun Ji-eun thought about how he had not been able to lift them for the past 7 years, and he finally managed to do it. His unique characteristics appeared. It was said that the main effect was to absorb the souls of the dead and use them as you wish, and the additional effects were a permanent increase in stats in the storage and use of souls. The boy smiled mischievously, thinking that if he came back with this skill, he could become a hunter. A portal appeared in front of him, and the system asked him to go to the waiting room. The brunette looked at the portal. Heading towards it, he said that he thought he had no choice but to go there. The portal began to open in a different place. A moment later, the protagonist fell out of it. Lying on the cold floor, he muttered that his wounds were worse than he thought. Suddenly, a green light appeared, and his eyes widened. Standing up, Sun Ji-eun looked at his hands and Sagami, where all his wounds healed and did the body heal after the test. Starting to walk forward, he noticed that in such a spacious room there was only one bed. He lay down on it. Looking at the ceiling, the brunette wondered what he should do now, and was he really able to get out of this tower? He tried to understand why she called him here. Suddenly his eyes widened in surprise. A screen appeared in front of him with the words that the following 5 commands are now available to him: information, smear, community, inventory, trial. The guy stood up, reading that, saying the command will lead to its activation. He began to slap himself on the cheeks, saying that for now he was focused on survival. The brunette activated the trial. The system noted that the time until the trial of the second floor is 23 hours 21 minutes. Sitting on the bed, he noted that he still had many trials ahead of him. Then he activated the community. A notification appeared that he entered a community of difficulty. A chat opened in which people asked to explain what was happening here, asking for their stats back, and someone wrote that 2 had not been a hunter before. The main character mentally noted that now he understood what was meant by the community. Frowning, he thought that everyone in the chat was confused, and besides, it seemed like people who weren't hunters were also dragged here. Suddenly, an admin entered the community and locked the chat. Sun Ji-eun perked up. The admin wrote that he had important information to share with those who had passed the tutorial trial. Sitting on the bed, the guy thought that maybe he would tell them how to return and that he found it difficult to remember everything. The admin wrote that he would teach them how to use the points they earned during the tutorial trial. That points were a currency used in the trial tower to buy from the store, and that points could be given out or received from others through the community. The brunette read the messages with fear in his eyes, that they couldn't get even a drop of water in the trial tower without points, and points could only be obtained through trials. Imagining himself dying of thirst and hunger, the protagonist thought that, in other words, he needed to do his best to get used to the rules of the tower. And the fact that he couldn't even get water without points meant that he needed to pass the challenges to earn points to survive. The admin wrote that that was all and exited the chat, unblocking it. The protagonist touched his face, saying that he thought he could become a hunter if he just came back. He looked away. Looking at the sword on the wall, Sun Ji-eun said that he couldn't do much with just a sword, and then activated the store. After a while, he covered himself with a shield. The guy swung his sword, thinking that all the hunters had lost all their stats when they entered the tower. He kicked off the floor with his foot, mentally noting that, however, it should be easier for them to master the skills they had previously mastered. The brunette with the sword jumped to the side, thinking that this is why he can't forget that he is not on the same starting line with them, and if he does not train, he will not be able to catch up with them. After a while, he was lying on the floor exhausted. A soft light appeared around his body. The protagonist stood up and stretched his body, saying that thanks to the healing effect of the waiting room, he can train without problems and prepare for the next trial. He froze when his stomach growled loudly. Sunjun opened his inventory, asking what to do with his hunger. He looked at the contents of his inventory, clenching a piece of dried meat between his teeth. The guy thought that he only had 40 points left after purchasing, and if not for the additional reward, he could not even dream of a shield. The system said that the remaining time until the second trial was 17 minutes and 17 seconds. Looking at the blue screen, the brunette mentally noted that time flew by unnoticed, and even the restless chat fell silent when it was almost time for the second test. Frozen, he wondered if he could survive again. The protagonist frowned, telling himself that he would definitely survive. There were 10 seconds left until the second test. The countdown continued. The waiting time was up. The system asked Sunjun if he was ready for the second floor test, and he answered positively. After that, he began to dive into the portal. A moment later, the guy found himself in the forest, and notifications began to arrive that he had entered the second floor of the hard difficulty test tower. His eyes widened in surprise. The brunette muttered that this time he found himself in the forest. The system noted that the goal of this test was assassination, and that he needed to kill the chieftain of the orc tribe in the allotted time. They showed the chieftain with staffs in his hands, who was directing his army. The protagonist found himself at the edge of a cliff. He saw a small camp below. With his mouth wide open, he asked if the orc tribe was there. Looking closer, Sunjun saw many green monsters below. With fear in his eyes, he asked if they really wanted him to go to a place teeming with orcs and kill their leader. The sun was shining on the camp. There were 2 guards at the entrance. A guy was watching him from the bushes. Frowning, he thought that in normal dungeons, if the orc tribe had a guard, then he should consider that they also had a huntsman. Looking at the large muscular monster with glowing eyes, he thought that he was not sure that he could defeat even the orc hero, let alone this entire crowd of monsters. Imagining the team of hunters, the brunette mentally noted that in order to defeat the orcs, at least an E-rank hunter would have to form a group, so his chances of winning were close to 0. Looking at him with a gloomy gaze, he wondered what he should do now. The protagonist sank completely to the ground, thinking that first of all, he should retreat and think about a strategy, and then he smiled, thinking that there was one way he could pass this test. In his hands was a torch. Sitting on the ground, Sunjun noted that he had collected enough logs. He stared at the fire. Opening a blue screen, the guy stuck the torch in it. It appeared in his inventory. Smiling contentedly, the brunette noted that it really worked. Birds flew over the green forest. Watching the orcs, the protagonist noted that they looked like lazy pigs, but in fact, they were a very conscientious race. Hiding behind a tree trunk, he thought that the huntsman should go hunting in the morning and return by sunset, so there was plenty of time. Imagining the crowd of green warriors, Sunjun thought that he had only one means to break through the numerical superiority, which was the biggest obstacle to the goal of this trial, and that was fire. He furrowed his brows confidently. The boy watched the entrance to the camp. Sitting by the trunk of a tree, he mentally noted that according to the Hunter Association, the orc sentry did not stand guard all the time, but returned to the village during meals or rest breaks. Rushing forward, he threw the torch. Running through the forest, he threw fire into the trees. After a while, the forest along with the camp began to burst into flames. The orcs began to run with buckets of water, trying to put it out. Looking at the thick smoke rising from the camp, the protagonist thought that when the fire completely engulfed the village, he would no longer have to worry about running into the orc rangers returning from hunting. Watching the monsters running through the forest, he made a mental note that he needed to catch at least 2 orc workers before the flames consumed the population. One of them broke away from the majority. The monster began to collect water from the river and turned around when he heard the sound. Suddenly, Sunjun plunged his sword into his back. A red and black outline of a soul began to appear around him, and the system asked if he wanted to absorb the orc spirit, to which the guy answered positively. Smiling, he said that this was exactly what he was waiting for. As the energy passed into his chest, a notification appeared saying that he had absorbed the orc spirit and his mastery increased to 9%. Then another tall orc approached him from behind. The brunette, gritting his teeth, began to turn around, recognizing the sentry in him. A moment later, he blocked his blow with his sword. Frowning his dark brows, he activated absorption. A blue light appeared, and the system noted that he could increase his stats using the spirits he owned, and his strength was increased by 4 and his agility by 2. The protagonist swung his sword furiously. Meanwhile, the fire was spreading. After a while, Sunjun absorbed the orc's soul, activating the accelerated regeneration skill, and that he could again increase his stats using the spirits he owned. The guy clenched his fist, seeing that his stamina was increased by 4, strength by 2, and agility by 3. He thought that now he did not risk dying when meeting another sentry. After a while, the sick man came out of the fire. Some orcs looked at him with frightened eyes. Frowning, he mentally noted that there were 3 orc hunters and 1 sentry in front of him. Looking inside the camp, the protagonist thought that he needed to add the barely old chieftain, a total of 5. Looking towards the chieftain, he thought that if he carefully went around the sentry, he could easily reach the chieftain. Running forward, Sun Ji-eun attacked 3 monsters in a row, thinking that thanks to the absorption of the sentry's spirit, the workers did not pose any threat to him. Confidently looking forward, he perked up. He saw another one behind the orc. The guy put up a shield, blocking its blow. Gritting his teeth tightly, he held the shield. Trying to get to the chieftain through the monster, the brunette mentally noted that the sentry had moved away from the chieftain, and apparently, he decided to refuse to perform the duties of a bodyguard next to him, and in fact, this sentry was the last obstacle. The protagonist swung his sword furiously. With a sharp blade, he pierced the sentry. Fire began to gather above the chieftain's staff. Sun Ji-eun climbed onto the body of the dead monster. At that moment, the chieftain pointed the flame at him. His eyes widened. A beam of fire hit him. The old chieftain laughed harshly. Ahead, in the thick smoke, a silhouette of a man was emerging. Shock appeared in the monster's eyes. The guy was clenching his teeth tightly, holding a shield in his hands, and above his head hung a sign that he had received the achievement He Who Withstood the Flames and that he had acquired the skill Burn Resistance rank F. The brunette, his eyes flashing, bared his teeth and said that he was finished. He headed straight for the monster. The chieftain waved his staff again and screamed loudly. A moment later, his hands were cut by the protagonist's blade. The orc screamed in pain. He froze, looking at the protagonist. A second later, he ran into the tent. Sun Ji-eun bared his teeth, looking with malice. The settlement followed. With one swing, the guy cut the fabric at the entrance. Suddenly, his eyes widened. The monster was sitting on the floor, hugging 2 trembling children. A green hand reached for the brunette's pant leg. A monster was sitting at his feet. Seeing him crying and grabbing his pants, the protagonist wondered if they really cared about their family too. He froze and darkened. The voices of his parents appeared in his head, telling him to run away, saying that at least he should definitely survive. A broken frame with a family photo lay on the bloody floor. Opa reached for the dagger behind his back. A second later, he swung it. Sun Ji-eun hit him on the head with the hilt, exclaiming that they, monsters, were not like him at all. Looking at the green monster, he thought that the 2, even if there was a chance that they would become ghosts, following in his footsteps, he would still exterminate them all. The chieftain ran towards him with another orc. The guy swung his sword. A moment later, the system congratulated him on overcoming the 2nd floor of the test tower. Looking at the battered shield, the brunette noted that it had become unusable, but it was thanks to it that he was able to survive. Opening the blue screens, he said that this time he was again on the verge of failure. The protagonist opened his mouth and said that the number of applicants had been reduced by almost half. His eyes widened. A certain person wrote in the community that he had figured out how to return to Earth by sending a letter with a question. Sun Ji-eun imagined many people walking in the sun in the park. He mentally noted that information was one of the 5 commands used in the test tower. The guy opened the tab with the question and read that he could write a question that the administrator would answer after processing was complete, and that each time he entered a new floor, 1 question ticket would be added. The brunette frowned, thinking that it turned out that he could use the right to send a letter with the question he was interested in here. It was noted that the chat naturally formed an atmosphere for exchanging information obtained during the sending of questions to the administrator. He collected the key points minus some small details. It was also said that after overcoming the 5th floor, temporary return stones will go on sale, with the help of which it will be possible to return to Earth for several days. And after the 8th floor, as it was said, a large-scale expansion of the system will be carried out and items will go on sale that allow you to finally return to Earth. The protagonist pursed his lips, thinking that if he returned to Earth with only the skills that he had now, then, having improved his characteristics, he could become an A rank hunter. A blue screen appeared with his unique characteristic Necromancer F rank, mastery 65%. Sun Ji-eun ruffled his hair, saying that on Earth, his abilities would be called Jack Flood. He bit his sad look, saying that he could hardly overcome the 2nd floor, and he was very far from the 8th. He said that in any case, you need to think positively, and that the stats that I always had at 0 were enduring, approaching the average of 20 points. Then his status window appeared, which said that his strength was 18, endurance 15, personality 14 plus 5, and mana 7. The guy dropped his Olympian on the floor. As a blood-black aura flared in his chest, he mentally noted that he needed to absorb the 5 spirits that he had obtained by risking his life. When he absorbed them, his strength became 27, endurance 25, agility 28 plus 5, and mana 13. The brunette opened his eyes in shock, thinking that the strength was simply overflowing him. He abruptly ran forward. Starting to run on the ceiling, the main character thought that he was beyond human capabilities, which he could only read about in a book before. He jumped off the stream. A moment later, his face distorted in surprise. A loud crash was heard. The protagonist was lying on the floor, slammed into the wall. Wiping the blood from his nose, he said that due to his rapid growth, his body had not yet gotten used to the new sensations, and then activated the store. Sun Jiun took the dead giant shield for 21 points. Activating the inventory, the guy noted that now was the perfect time to use the rewards from the previous trials. He looked at the E+ rank Black Iron Sword, which added 5 reaction speed, 10 attack speed. He also had a D rank Assassin's Cloak, which reduced sensitivity by 10% and which increased movement speed by 15% for 1 minute when agility is below 50. The brunette put the items on himself. He sighed, thinking that he could get used to this equipment before the next trial. The protagonist rushed forward. He grabbed the hilt of the sword. Sun Jiun swung it, mentally noting that he would become so strong that no one would be able to catch up with him. Water flowed down the stalagmites in the cave. Inside it, a guy appeared through a portal. The system noted that the 3rd floor of the high difficulty trial tower had been entered, and the theme of this trial was a duel. The brunette opened his mouth in surprise, asking if he was in the cave. He raised his head, looking into the crevice above. The protagonist perked up when he was notified that a dark guardian would appear in 10 seconds. He got into a fighting stance, thinking that like the sand golem, it could appear from anywhere, so he had to be on guard. There were 5 seconds left until the dark guardian appeared, 3 seconds, 1 second. The system notified of the guardian's appearance. A human shadow appeared behind the protagonist. His eyes widened. The shadow guardian attacked him with a weapon. After that, he smiled contentedly. Sun Jiun bared his teeth in anger. The system notification said that he needed to defeat the shadow guard, his double. Gritting his teeth, he turned back. Sun Jiun kicked his opponent. They stood opposite each other. The triplet licked his sharp fangs with a grin, and the guy was breathing heavily. When the accelerated regeneration skill was activated, he mentally noted that if he had not reacted in time, his spine would have been broken. The brunette pursed his lips, thinking about the shadow pose. Equipment clanked in the cave. Looking at the exact same fighting stance of the enemy, the protagonist wondered if this creature was imitating his movements. He ran forward, thinking that he needed to clash with him in battle to test his guess. Sun Jiun abruptly rushed past the enemy. He looked back in confusion. Suddenly, blood splashed to the sides. The guy stopped some distance from the shadow guard. He frowned. The brunette saw how the monster's wound began to heal. He angrily clenched his teeth. The protagonist grinned, noting that he also had a recovery skill. The enemy ran at him. The monster just as unexpectedly rushed past. Sun Jiun put his foot forward, thinking that he was right that this monster was repeating all his attacks. He hit the guard, not allowing himself to be attacked. The guy ran forward, mentally noting that in this case, he could use the weaknesses of his swordsmanship to crush this creature. A fierce fight began between them. The protagonist swung his sword. Suddenly, the tip of the sword appeared in front of his face. The sound of a blow was heard. The opponents jumped in different directions. The brunette opened his mouth in surprise, mentally asking what just happened. The sword flew up in the air. The monster began to powerfully attack him. Sun Jiun clenched his teeth, wondering if he was imagining things, and then wondered if this one had really managed to become so strong in such a short period of time. The monster and the guy jumped back. The monster perplexedly shook itself. Black and blue energy began to blaze from the brunette's body, and the system noted the activation of the exclusive effect of the killer's cloak, which increased movement speed by 15%. The protagonist frowned, thinking that if this fight dragged on, he would be in danger, so he needed to deal with it within 1 minute while the timer was active. The guard bared his teeth and growled. Sun Jiun rushed forward at great speed. He rushed straight at his opponent. A second later, he dodged the blow. Grouping himself, the guy hit the monster again. Then he put his sword to its throat. Then the enemy pierced it. The brunette smiled contentedly, thinking that he had succeeded. The guardian screamed in pain and began to fall backwards. Extending his arm, he cut off the protagonist's arm that held the sword. Sun Jiun looked at the splashes of blood in shock. A moment later, he screamed loudly. Squinting his eyes, the guy told himself to pull himself together since this was not the end. Looking at the monster, a question arose in his mind. The brunette frowned, wondering why he was not moving. He mentally noted that even though that creature had a good healing skill, it still took some time to recover. While his bloody hand with the sword lay to the side, the protagonist thought that he should kill the Dark Guardian right now, but it was unclear how he could do it without a sword. He breathed heavily, seeing that the remaining time of the skill was 11 seconds. Sun Jiun put a shield in front of himself, mentally noting that perhaps he was going to real madness now. Putting his leg back, he rested his foot on the ground, thinking that it would be better to pull off such a crazy trick than to die. The guy rushed forward. His opponent perplexedly shook himself. The brunette approached him. The monster bared his teeth and swung his shoulder. Meanwhile, the protagonist ran at him with a sword. A moment later, he hit him. The monster flew away from him a huge distance. Dust rose in the air. The wounded monster, twisted, lay on the ground. Blood flowed down his face. Sun Jun stood next to him with a shield and swung. Baring his teeth, he wished death to his opponent. A moment later, he hit the monster. His head flew to the side. The system congratulated him on passing the 3rd floor of the testing tower. Then he entered the waiting room of the 4th floor, and all of the guy's wounds were healed. He looked at his hand, which was previously cut off. He touched the wall with it and looked at it. Then the brunette punched him. The wall was covered with huge cracks from the impact. The protagonist smiled widely, noting that this was a flawless healing. A notification appeared saying that the number of souls in his possession was a 5th. Remembering how he sucked in the Dark Guardian, Sun Jun mentally noted that this was the spirit of the double that he had lost his mind in the cave after passing the trial of the 3rd floor. Looking with surprised eyes at the bright light from his chest, the guy thought that the consistency of the spirit was so dense that it could not be compared with the monsters that he had absorbed earlier. A notification appeared saying that the mastery of the unique characteristic Necromancy had reached 100%, and the rank of the unique characteristic Necromancy was raised by 1 level to E rank. A 3rd additional effect appeared, which, when absorbing the spirit of a skillful person, gave a certain probability that one of the skills imprinted in the soul could be given. After reading about it, the brunette's mouth dropped open in shock, wondering if he could really absorb skills. Thinking back to himself in the orc camp, he mentally noted that just like how he was able to obtain accelerated regeneration only after being on the brink of death several times, skills could never be obtained with a snap of a finger. The protagonist smiled widely, saying that in his entire life, the thought of being given such a mind-blowing unique characteristic had never crossed his mind. And of course, it shouldn't be overlooked that the description said likelihood of acquisition. He said that he thought he just needed to check how lucky he was, that's all. Blue screens appeared in front of him, indicating the entrance to the high difficulty 4th floor community. Sun Jun said that this was his 3rd time returning to the waiting room, so the environment already seemed so familiar to him, as if he was at home. He perplexedly perked up. The chat was bursting with messages that apparently the 4th floor test would not be individual, but a group one. Looking at the screen, the guy wondered if it meant that there would be a joint test and a team of players would be formed. A certain player wrote that he might be exaggerating, but he was sent a response saying that the theme of the next test would be a competition. He asked if this would mean that the players would have to kill each other. The brunette froze in horror. Remembering the pools of blood, he wondered if it meant that in the next test there was a chance that he would have to kill a person. The system noted that the selection of candidates was complete, and that the 4th floor test was beginning, which would last 24 hours, and the condition for successfully passing the joint test was to defeat the Goblin King within the allotted time. The fortress wall of the castle appeared in front of the players. It was noted that the condition for failing the test was the destruction of all the candidates selected for the team or the passage of a certain amount of time, and that the penalty for failure was death. The protagonist moved to the floor. Other players appeared in front of him. They were standing on the ground, on which a pentagram was drawn. Sun Jun pursed his lips, thinking that he was embarrassed, since recently he only crossed paths with monsters. He looked away when a player suggested introducing themselves to each other, since they were now a team. The brunette with a staff in her hand said that her name was Lee Hayan. She smiled and added that she specializes in providing support to the team, and was also an E-rank hunter on the outside. The girl turned around when another player noted that in that case, he thought that their team was not a complete bunch of scum. Lee Sung-hoon threw a large two-handed sword over his shoulder and introduced himself, saying that he specializes in close combat and was a D-rank hunter on the outside. Sun Jun frowned, thinking that unlike this, hunters of this rank always behave politely on Earth. Looking at them, he said his name and that he also specialized in close combat, but was not a hunter on the outside and was only undergoing training. The brown-haired man gritted his teeth and asked if that meant he was just a cadet. The guy perked up and darkened when he was ordered not to get underfoot. He looked up. Looking at the man, the brunette said that he nevertheless believed that he was a good fighter and could handle the role assigned to him. Sung-hoon frowned and replied that if he decided that he was only causing harm, he would immediately eliminate him. Imagining the dark, mocking silhouettes, the brunette thought that he had long been accustomed to such looks. Frowning, he handed over his weapon, thinking that for a moment he had managed to forget about his past. The brown-haired man turned around and looked back, calling out to the cadet and telling him to stay behind and take care of the small mobs. The protagonist mentally noted that not only was he annoying him, but he could also confidently say that his abilities were more than enough to return his words in kind. Looking at the large gates of the fortress, he concluded that the Tower of Trials was all about skills. System notifications began to appear with words about how to cooperate with his team members and complete the trial before the other team, and then they noted the opening of the main gate of the citadel. The gates began to lower. Goblins immediately burst out of them. Sung-hoon took the blow of 3 of them. Covering himself with his sword, he loudly asked how the goblins could move in such a battle formation, and then began to demand Sun Jun to fight. The guy looked at him with a gloomy look. Standing by the corpse of the slain goblin, he noticed that the two mulattoes did not look in his direction. Heian exclaimed behind him that her spell would be completed any minute. The brown-haired man holding back the monsters shouted, telling her to stop chatting and make some kind of buff as soon as possible. The girl replied that she had already used all her support spells. The brunette approached her and addressed her, saying that it seemed that he needed help, and he left her for a while. Heian, with a worried look, told him to stop. A moment later, the protagonist rushed forward. The huntress frowned, asking who would cover her from behind if he left. Suddenly, her eyes widened. She saw many goblin corpses to the side. The brunette, frozen in place, said that she could not believe her eyes. The remaining goblins attacked. Sung Hoon, blocking the blows, cursed loudly. One of the monsters was spinning a mace on a chain. Then he threw it at the man. The blow sent the sword flying out of his hands. He landed on the ground. The goblin jumped on the unarmed brown-haired man. Looking at him with frightened eyes, he indignantly asked why he was so unlucky to be on the same team as a cadet. At that moment, the main character attacked the monster. The man froze with surprise in his eyes. The monster perked up, seeing the corpse of his comrade. Sun Jun stood in front of his teammate. Without turning his head, he told Sung Hoon to stand aside. The hunter opened his mouth in confusion. Flashing an evil look, the guy told him not to get under his feet. With lightning-fast movements, he began to kill his opponents. When the corpses flew in different directions, a notification appeared that he had received the title of Goblin Hunter. Watching, the man opened his mouth wide in horror. The hero walked between the goblin corpses, absorbing dark energy. He frowned and noticed that the black haze of his unique characteristic remained invisible to their gaze, so he could absorb souls as much as he wanted without any problems. Notification: increase stats using spirits you have. Strength increased by 3, agility increased by 4, endurance increased by 2, toughness increased by 7. Absorbed one of the Goblin Guardian skills. The brunette shuddered in surprise and read about the new skill. Skill: Guardian Sensitivity F Mastery 0%. Effect: the overall field of view expands, making it easier to notice approaching subjects. Sun Jun's eyes widened and he looked to the side. Now he understood what it was like to see the world from a wider angle. The guy grinned, happy about another jackpot. He came closer to his teammates. Sung Hoon smiled tensely and said that luck was on the cadet's side since he was only up against weak goblins. The man added that, be that as it may, the young man had tried hard. The protagonist and Heian looked at their comrade in silence. The brunette pulled up his hood and said that from now on he would be leading the operation himself, moving in the vanguard. He suggested that this formation would bring the greatest benefit to the team. Sun Jun looked closely at the man and asked if he had any objections. The knight frowned, then looked away and replied that so be it. The hunter asked if there were any other instructions. The hero said that he should simply protect Heian, nothing more was required of him. He turned to the girl with a request to provide support and provide orientation on the terrain. In a word, to do the same as before. The sorceress smiled and agreed to work productively in the remaining time. She extended her glowing hand forward and resumed searching for her target. The hero continued attacking the goblin squads, absorbing their souls and increasing his skill level to 12% for now. Time remaining, 14 hours 37 minutes. Night had fallen. The trio walked between the debris. The girl noted that although the goblins had been attacking with varying frequency, everything was too quiet now. The brunette stopped and looked ahead, then suddenly rushed forward without explaining anything. His teammates hurried after him in surprise, asking what had happened. Heian looked ahead. In front of them was a square with a fountain strewn with dead goblins. Sun Jun assumed that the other contenders had already been here. The man looked around in amazement and asked if the rivals really had rocket turbines instead of legs. The hero touched the monster's blood and noticed that it was still warm, which meant they could catch up with their competitors if they hurried. If the other team won, they, who failed the test, would die. The brunette raised his head and said that they had better hurry. The goblins were running to attack. Someone stood and hit his shield with a sword, attracting the monsters. One of the monsters looked back, feeling someone step on him. The guy with the blades was sitting on the goblin's shoulders. He grimaced and muttered that he was already sick of hunting goblins. The hunter expressed hope that this was the last fight before going to the boss. The monsters rushed at him. The player jumped up, dodging the attacks. He bared his teeth and his eyes lit up. A few moments later, the guy was already standing among the corpses. The knight and the wizard looked at Lee Xian and praised him for a job well done. The assassin grimaced and complained that he had to do everything alone. He turned to a knight named Li Jinhu and asked if he liked skimming off all the cream. The other man smiled awkwardly and asked him not to say that. Xian snorted and demanded that he go and open the boss room. In front of them was a tall gate with an eye. The assassin looked at his retreating teammate and said that he wanted to finish everything quickly and have a good rest. The guy turned around and promised that he would open the door immediately. The knight turned away and grimaced, thinking that the hunter treated him like a little dog. Notification, condition fulfilled. All members of the challenger team have entered the Goblin King's Spire. The boss battle will not begin until only one of the two teams remains. Jinwoo shuddered when a red wall appeared in front of him. Notification, it will be impossible to escape from the current location at this point. All team members raised their heads. An energy cube covered the entire space around them. Sion frowned and asked what kind of nonsense this was. The wizard twitched and drew the assassin's attention to look away. The protagonist's team was approaching them. Sun Jiun looked at his opponents grimly. The opponents looked at each other, and Sion cursed and muttered that he wanted to end it as soon as possible. The protagonist frowned and said that he would fight alone, and asked Heian to provide him with a buff that increased agility, and all the other buffs could be provided to the gladiator. The girl looked closely at her companion and said that she had seen with her own eyes how strong he was, but perhaps humans would be scarier than all of these monsters combined. The opponents looked at them menacingly. Sun Jiun turned to his partner and replied that if he felt that he was in danger, he would immediately give a signal. Until then, he would count on her support. The sorceress held her staff out in front of her and said that she would do her best. Agility increased by 2. The agility boost effect lasts for 10 minutes. The hero moved forward, his body surrounded by a glow. The guy thought that he was convinced that he had already surpassed the skill level of the average hunter. In addition, he had just killed more than 30 goblins. Sion took a fighting stance and ordered the team to prepare for battle. Sun Jiun rushed to attack, deciding that his current self was strong enough to cope with this test. The guy quickly approached the opponents. The assassin frowned and sweated. He suddenly jumped behind the knight and ordered him to immediately use his shield at full power. Jinwoo frowned and activated his defense. A golden energy field appeared in front of the three. The protagonist swung and hit the shield, cutting it into pieces. The enemy team shielded themselves with their hands from the gust of wind. Sun Jiun immediately rushed forward, attacking each of the opponents. Heian and Sung Hoon looked at him in shock. The brunette exchanged glances with the enraged assassin. The guys entered the fight, exchanging blows. Sion gritted his teeth, parrying the blows. The brunette thought that his opponent's skills were clearly inferior to his, but, surprisingly, he easily repelled all the attacks. His eyes flashed and decided that he should act more decisively. The warrior appeared behind the enemy and cut the air with his sword, confident that now the opponent was finished. The assassin parried the attack with his blade. Sun Jiun was stunned by his skills. The enemy gritted his teeth, and his eyes burned. The hero guessed that the assassin was able to see the trace of the blade aimed at him. Sion jumped back, but then a shield appeared in front of his face. The guy frowned, realizing that this limited his field of vision. The brunette appeared from under the shield and pierced the enemy in the chest. Sion coughed and was indignant. What bad luck. Notification, congratulations, you have completed the special task. Bonuses will be added to the reward for completing the 4th floor. The teammates approached the hero. The girl noticed that his hands were shaking. She looked at him worriedly and asked if everything was okay. The guy's face looked detached, but he answered that everything was fine. Heian looked closely at her comrade, guessing that he was in shock because of the murder he had just committed. It seemed to her that the hero was a strong and cold-blooded person. Sun Jiun turned to them and asked if they were ready to go to the boss right now. The partners confidently agreed. Blood spurted from the Goblin King's mouth. The brunette pierced him with his sword, jumping from behind. Notification, the test target, the Goblin King, has been destroyed. The boy jumped to the floor and the body of a monster fell behind him. Sung Hoon looked at the hero in shock and thought that he must be a monster. Notification, congratulations, you have passed the 4th floor of the trial tower. As a reward for breaking through, all stats have been increased by 4. As a bonus reward, the skill instant acceleration was received. Teleported to the waiting room. The gladiator turned around and said that he would leave them first. The hero stood in front of the sorceress. He said that he hoped that she would return safely. The girl looked at him carefully and said that her words may have been out of place, but the boy only did what he had to do. The bodies of the defeated players lay behind them. Heian added that someone had to kill the enemy team anyway. If the hero had refused, she would have joined the fight. The brunette looked at his interlocutor in surprise. He smirked and replied that after her words, his soul felt better. The guy looked questioningly at his partner, who pointed her finger into the air. A notification window appeared in front of him. The challenger Heian sent you a friend request. The girl turned around and said that, one could say, the test of the 4th floor was completely passed due to his power, so she had a feeling as if she was indebted to him and this made her a little uneasy. The sorceress blushed slightly and asked to find Heian from the White Guild in the future when he returned to Earth. The hero watched her in surprise until she disappeared into the portal. Sun Jiun turned around to look at the dark energy swirling nearby. Left alone, he had to make a decision. Glowing cores hung over the bodies of the dead. Would the guy decide to absorb a human soul or not? When he made sure that he was capable of something like this, he postponed the absorption process for later as he felt that he was about to cross an irreversible line. Now the hero has made up his mind. He jerked his hand, and energy began to emanate from the dead man's body. Sun Ji-eun stretched out his hand, absorbing the power, and thought that although he had no intention of killing people to become stronger, in a situation where he had no choice, he would have to resort to murder. In addition to his original desire to become a hunter, new ambitions were already beginning to sprout in his soul. The trial tower had given him a chance, and he would take full advantage of it. The hero wants to continue climbing to the top of the trial tower. The brunette passed through the portal and entered the waiting room of the 5th floor. Notification: system expansion begins. A ranking system for applicants has been created, and the results of the trials are being summarized. The guy looked at the system window in surprise. The window required entering a nickname. Sun Ji-eun thoughtfully touched his chin, and then entered the word. Your nickname has been changed from Sun Ji-eun to Hunter. The results of the 4th floor trial are being summarized. 1 Kim Seung-hoon, 2 Lee In-hoon, 3 What's an alias change, 4 Hee Sun-ah, 5 Artisan of the Brain, 6 Overpowered Sword. Everything was in plain sight. The guy tapped the screen to check if he was somewhere on this list. The hero's eyes widened, finding himself in 16th place. His 4th floor challenge breakthrough time: 11 hours, 14 minutes and 51 seconds. 4th floor challenge breakthrough process: SS+. 4th floor challenge clearance result: B+. 4th floor challenge overall summary: A. The brunette looked at the notification and noted that his ranking was much higher than he thought. Applicants who made it into the top 50 would be designated as pioneers. Those who received pioneer status would receive an advantage on the 8th floor. Notice, if you maintain the pioneer status until the 8th floor, you will receive the Halo privilege. The hero wondered what that could mean. He swiped the system menu, deciding that he would figure it out when the time came. Notice, please select a spirit to absorb from your existing souls. Number of souls in possession: 4/15. Dark energy swirled in the hero's chest. Increase stats using the spirits you have. Now he felt that he had finally crossed the boundaries of human capabilities. The boy clenched his fist, feeling a new strength. Purchase of the Homecoming Stone. You can now leave the trial tower for 3 days and return to your original location. Sun Ji-eun took the weapon and squeezed the artifact to see if it could move along with his equipment. Absorbing the Homecoming Stone, destination: Earth. The brunette smiled and thought that he was finally returning to Earth. The challenger Sun Ji-eun confirmed his intention to return. The young man began to fall down. The absorption process began. The final destination is Earth. The boy screamed when he saw his body being sucked into the funnel. Notification: you have safely returned to your original place of residence. In 3 days, you will be moved again to the trial tower. The curtains fluttered in the wind. The hero opened his eyes while lying on the bed. He stood up and looked around. The guy had indeed returned to his home. Sun Ji-eun leaned back on the pillow, deciding that he could get a good night's sleep, because compared to the bed in the waiting room, his sleeping place was a real heavenly bed. The brunette grimaced, feeling an unpleasant smell. The hero sat up, realizing that he had better wash himself first. He looked down and found a shield and sword on the floor. The hunter picked them up and was glad that he could take items from the trial tower with him to the ground. This meant that other challengers could do so too. The guy frowned and muttered that he needed to act as quickly as possible. Soon the number of those returning to the ground would increase, which would lead to a sharp increase in the number of items and a drop in the prices of hunter equipment on the market. Sun Ji-eun looked at the equipment, deciding that he needed to get rid of it as soon as possible. The problem is that only those with the hunter qualification can sell items on the market. Initially, the hero only planned to apply for the hunter exam and pass it during his next return. He looked at his phone and muttered that he had a lot more to do than he thought. The cadets were training on the training field. The supervisor watched them from above. The man turned around when he heard the phone ring. He picked up the phone and introduced himself as Hwang Manhwa, an instructor at the White Lotus Training Center. The hero gave his name and asked if he remembered it. The interlocutor bowed his head in annoyance and replied that he remembered. He added that the guy could apply for a refund online. Manhwa was surprised to hear that the young man did not ask for a refund of the tuition fee he had paid. The supervisor looked out the window and asked if he would regret his decision. The brunette answered in the negative and added that he would have one request. The man sighed tiredly and said that if he was going to ask for permission to resume training at the center again, he would be refused. Sun Ji-eun asked for help in passing the hunter exam. The instructor frowned and reminded him of how his midterm assessment went. He was given an F rank, and that was a stretch. The man began to say what would happen if a person without unique characteristics and skills took the exam, but the guy interrupted him. He asked if the supervisor couldn't help him, even though the young man refused to return the money. Manhwa shuddered and replied that he could calmly change his mind because money is never superfluous. The hero smirked when he heard such an answer. He looked forward decisively and offered the instructor to make a deal. All he had to do was arrange for the guy to pass the hunter qualification exam today. Sun Ji-eun got out of the shower and dried his hair with a towel. He looked in the mirror at his body, his pumped up muscles. The brunette examined himself and concluded that, proportionally to his progress, his body had changed a lot too. The hero got dressed and muttered that now was not the time to admire his beloved self. He needed to hurry to take the exam. The guy went out into the hallway and met his neighbor. Sun Ji-yoon looked at her and thought that he really missed such a normal everyday life. He bowed and greeted the girl. She turned and greeted him back, thinking that this was the same neighbor who had been trying to become a hunter for 1,000 years. The brunette passed by, smiling and wishing her a good day. The woman blushed slightly and muttered if this guy had always been so tall. The hero waved his hand near the road, but no taxi stopped. He thoughtfully looked away. A few minutes later, the guy was already racing forward, jumping between the roofs of houses. Sun Ji-yoon grinned and muttered that running to the destination was also a good option. The guy pushed off and thought he would soon be there. Hunters Association. The brunette entered a tall building and stood in front of two men. The young man smiled and said that he had not seen the instructor for a long time. Manhwa chuckled and replied that not much time had passed since their last meeting. The hero looked at him confidently and said that he had been through so much in the last few days that it felt like 100 years had passed. The man looked at him in surprise and asked again. The young man confirmed that the days had not been easy. A man in a suit approached them and introduced himself as Kim In-hoo, the examiner who would be evaluating the test. He looked at the hero and said that he probably knew that, at the instructor's request, he would not have to take the theory test and interview. The examiner asked if the cadet had any questions about the exam. The brunette answered negatively, and the interlocutor invited him to follow him. Sun Ji-yoon stood in a large pavilion, holding a sword in his hand, and the man watched from above. Manhwa looked at the interlocutor and reminded him of his request to expel the guy as soon as possible. In-hoo replied that there was no need to worry because the monsters with the worst compatibility with the examinee were prepared for testing. The examiner looked at the guy and said loudly that he could choose the difficulty of the exam from 1 to 10 as soon as he was ready. The hero frowned and thought that he had always chosen the first difficulty level in this exam before and lost to the goblin every time. All because he was weak. The supervisor grinned and muttered that he would definitely choose the first difficulty level. He was interrupted by Sun Ji-yoon's voice, who chose the 10th difficulty level. The man shuddered in surprise and asked again. The brunette looked at him with a smirk. The instructor grimaced and said that he was a sick bastard. Notification, exam begins. Firebird hunt. A flaming monster appeared in front of the guy and screamed. The hero twitched. The notification said that the movement was slowed down by 25% due to the skill predator's roar. The blade of the sword cracked. The instructor grinned and thought that the boy would never pass the exam because he had slightly adjusted his weapon. Manhwa looked down at the hero, expecting his humiliation. The firebird flew up, blowing heat on the boy. Sun Ji-yoon's eyes sparkled, looking at the approaching enemy. The instructor remembered the day he passed his exam. Having finally become a hunter, he thought that he was the best. However, gradually the gap with his peers began to widen, and in the end, the man gave up trying to fill this gap. The world of hunters is based on innate talent. He accepted this fact and stopped trying to change anything. People are forced to give up when they feel a wall in front of them that they cannot overcome. The man was sure that everyone did this, not just him. Therefore, the instructor believed that it was time for the main character to give up too. Sun Ji-yoon put out his sword to parry the blow, but suddenly the blade cracked. The brunette looked at the blade in surprise and jumped back. The boy thought that even if it was a low-level weapon, there was no way it could crack so easily. The hero frowned and glanced sideways at Manhwa, guessing his plan. The curator smiled ominously and wondered what the boy would do with the broken sword now. The monster rose higher with a scream and attacked with a fireball. Sun Ji-yoon frowned and decided that he was even glad that things turned out this way. The perfect situation to test the skills he managed to get on the 4th floor of the test tower. Instant acceleration. The brunette crouched, then pushed off and landed on the ceiling above the bird. The hero smiled slyly and thought that this was much better than the increase in movement speed when using the buff of the assassin's cloak. The monster growled and began to prepare for another attack. Sun Ji-yoon pushed off and plunged the broken blade into the enemy's eye. The bird howled in pain. The guy landed on the floor and muttered that the sword was, as expected, too short. He picked up one of the slabs from the floor and swung it at the guy, managing to slice his head in half. The slab smashed into the wall, breaking through the crossbars of the balcony where the men were standing. The curator turned around, dumbfounded, and asked what the hell this bastard was doing. The exam was over. Congratulations. The monster fell down. Sun Ji-yoon waved his hand and asked if the audience was okay because he didn't expect the tile to fly to them. The brunette smiled decisively. The woman smiled widely and handed the hero a hunter's card, congratulating him on successfully passing the exam. The guy accepted it with gratitude. The interlocutor said that since he was registered with the Hunters Association, He could now officially engage in hunting activities. He looked at her and clarified whether she meant entering the dungeon and selling items. The woman answered in the affirmative. Manhwa slammed the table and asked the man sitting opposite how this could even happen. The examiner promised that the guy would fail within 10 seconds, but in the end, he passed the test in that time. Manhwa straightened his tie and muttered that the interlocutor really knew how to joke. The man looked at the instructor and declared that he had done everything in his power. Based on the stated data, Cadet Sunjun would never be able to pass this test. Manhwa frowned and asked if it was possible to assign the youth a lower rank. The examiner was surprised. Where else could it be lower? He killed a monster in 10 seconds, which is aimed at cadets who received rank D at the midterm assessment. If the hero was assigned rank D, he could appeal. Sunjun entered the conference room and said that he received a hunter's certificate. Manhwa coughed and congratulated him. The guy came closer and looked at the curator, noticing that he did not look very well. Manhwa smiled tensely and congratulated the interlocutor on his status as a hunter. The hero looked at him and said that, if his memory serves him correctly, the man reached rank C before retiring. The man tensely asked him what he meant. The brunette tilted his head and said that the instructor said that he considered him scum, but perhaps he really was that scum. Manhwa's face was distorted with hatred. The instructor swung at the young man, shouting that he had completely lost his fear. The examiner tried to calm him down. The hero smiled and thought that, contrary to expectations, the man had easily fallen for his provocation. He deftly dodged the fist and hit his opponent in the stomach. The brunette frowned and said that he had just acted in self-defense. Sunjun slapped the curator and added that this was his response to aggressive actions. The man recoiled, not understanding where such strength came from for a C rank. The guy stood in front of the examiner. He looked at him carefully and asked if he was really offering him a job as a direct employee of the Hunters Association. Manhwa answered in the affirmative and added that his salary would be 1 billion won, and a larger amount could be discussed. The man said that the hero would only benefit if he accepted his offer. Sunjun looked at the card and muttered that such an amount was a good start. Manhwa smiled and said that he had simply seen his potential. The guy said that it seemed that the difficulty level of the exam was adjusted arbitrarily. The interlocutor shuddered and sweated. The brunette turned around and said that he would not make a big deal out of it, but it was not in his rules to make a deal with someone he did not trust at all. The hero threw the examiner's business card and left. 2 days later, on TV, the host reported that there were rumors that a mysterious phenomenon called the Trial Tower had been observed among hunters lately. The hero closed his laptop and muttered that everyone finally knew about the Trial Tower. He took the chest and the stone and held the phone in his other hand. Sunjun said that he got rid of the equipment at a very good price. After all, these 3 days were spent very productively. It seems that your time on Earth is coming to an end. Notification: in a few seconds, you will be transferred to the Trial Tower. The brunette looked at the system window and said that he would do it with pleasure. Time is up. You return to the Trial Tower. Now he is again looking forward to his further progress. The guy found himself in subspace. The hero smiled and said that upon his return, he would again have a lot of things to do. The space around him gradually took on the appearance of a room. The hunter looked down and found himself on a bed, so he returned to the tower. Sunjun sat up and muttered that, as expected, you can freely move items between the tower and the real world. The chest and stone lay on the floor nearby, and the hero hurried to throw them into his inventory. The hero pushed off and jumped to the floor. He began to stretch his arms, deciding to warm up and, without wasting time, challenge the 5th floor. Notification: you have earned the achievement First Return. The skill Eye of Truth has been created. The hero's eyes began to glow purple. Mastery: none. Effect: using mana, you can obtain information about the target you are observing, as well as determine whether the opponent's words are true. The guy looked at the system window and concluded that, in addition to obtaining data about the object of observation, he was even able to distinguish between lies and truth. The brunette smiled and exclaimed that this was a real jackpot. Thunder Sword purchased, 55 0 points will be deducted. Hunter Scout Shield purchased, 38 0 points will be deducted. The hero swung his new weapon. Although he had shelled out a ton of points for the sword, he really liked its options. 10% chance to apply the lightning effect when hitting an enemy. The guy decided that it would definitely be useful. A notification window appeared in front of him. You are ready to begin the test on the 5th floor. Sunjun resolutely jumped into the portal, determined to begin the test after so much time. Entered the 5th floor of the test tower. Selected difficulty: hard. The theme of this test is hunting. Remaining time: 24 hours. Condition for successful completion: defeating the werewolf boss in the Wolf Ravine. Conditions for failing the test: the death of the challenger or the expiration of the allotted time. The reward for a successful breakthrough is a werewolf headband. The penalty in case of failure is death. The hero found himself in front of a high mountain with the moon shining above. He smiled and clutched his sword. Werewolves gathered around him. The animals growled and rushed to attack. In a few precise movements, the guy cut them down, making his way forward. Sun Jun kicked another enemy. The wolf flew to the side, and the guy was indignant. Why are they so puny? The werewolf hit his big paw. The hero shuddered and looked in that direction. 3 large white wolves stood in front of him. The beaten dog whined pitifully. The white monster roared and bit into the small wolf. The large monsters began to surround the hunter. He looked up warily. His eyes sparkled in anticipation. The trial tower never disappoints. The wolves rushed to attack. The player pushed off and swung his blade, saying that he was even starting to enjoy the trials. He delivered a slash and muttered that he might be slowly going crazy. The blade swept across all the wolves, leaving wounds on them. Mastery of the hunter's dagger skill reached 100%. The hunter's dagger skill was increased to rank E+. The accelerated regeneration skill was increased to rank D. The guy landed on the ground, feeling his strength growing. He frowned and thought that the hunter's dagger skill he had obtained on the 3rd floor had also almost reached its growth limit. He needed to obtain a new swordsmanship skill. 2 wolves jumped from the boy's back. The hero turned around and said with a smile that they could continue to attack without stopping. His back was to the scattered corpses that emanated dark energy. The boy raised his hand, absorbing the power, and noted that he had already managed to hunt 3 times, and it turned out that the sword lightning effect appeared even less often than he thought. You have absorbed several spirits of the crazed wolf. Mastery has increased by 16%. The brunette looked at the system window and noticed that the mastery of the unique characteristic was also steadily increasing. If he gave it his all, he would be able to achieve an increase in the rank of his unique characteristic. He moved on, reaching almost the middle of the wolf ravine. Sun Jun stopped. There were corpses of wolves lying around. The hero assumed that there was a conflict in the pack. The boy crouched down to the body and realized that the cut was too clear, which meant it was made by a sword. He looked at the rock and thought that the marks left nearby only confirmed his assumption. Hunters used the eye of truth, and his eyes turned purple. He looked at the wall. A trace of aura, rank D. A trace left after a rather skillful aura neatly split the wall. The boy stood among the defeated monsters, wondering if aura was also one of the skills. Sun Jun frowned and thought that there were too many nuances that did not fit in his head. He felt somehow uneasy. Suddenly, a howl was heard. The hero jerked forward, realizing that it was somewhere nearby. He rushed along the gorge until he noticed something in front of him. Ahead was the entrance to a cave from which a roar was heard. A werewolf flew out of it. He hit the ground several times. The brunette looked at him in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Notification: the boss werewolf required to pass the trial has died. Investigating the cause. Loading. The hero looked at the monster lying at his feet and could not believe that the trial target was dead. Analysis complete. The brunette jerked and looked at the system window. An intrusion was detected in the Sun Jun challenger's trial. The trial target has been changed. Kill the challenger from another dimension who has intruded into your trial. A man in armor came out of the cave. The hero looked at him, processing the information. He realized that the trial tower existed in several dimensions at once, other than Earth. The hunter squinted, trying to understand how the enemy had ended up here at all. The knight looked at him and said that he did not expect the challenger from the underdeveloped world to still be alive. He clarified that the hero was the master of this trial. The man pointed his sword at the boy and decided that he was silent because he was paralyzed by fear of his impending death. The brunette smiled nervously and thought that this bastard was also cuckoo. They stood opposite each other. The hero looked ahead and thought that he did not expect a situation where the target of his test would be killed by an intruder from another dimension. However, he was very lucky that the test did not fail. The brunette frowned. The enemy assumed a fighting stance, and his sword began to shine. He asked if the boy was so scared that he could not utter a word. In that case, the knight decided to end his suffering right then. Sun Jun frowned, noticing that the enemy was advancing. The enemy quickly ran forward. The hero kicked the werewolf's corpse, throwing it towards the intruder. The wolf flew at the knight, but he cut it with his sword. He looked away. The brunette ran around him and swung his sword, saying that he was caught. The guy jabbed his sword at the armor, but then his eyes widened in surprise. The blade slipped, although the hero was going to cut the enemy in half. The enemy swung his sword and said that the young man was caught here. He brought down a blow on the hunter, who barely managed to cover himself with a shield. The defense split into pieces. The guy was thrown back and slammed into a rock. Sun Jun coughed in pain. The brunette grabbed his broken arm and clenched his teeth. The enemy came closer and was surprised that the young man blocked the aura. If he allowed himself to be cut in half, he would have met a quick and painless death. The hero frowned and shouted that he had never heard of any invaders. The knight came closer and replied that the barbarian had no way of knowing what a floor infiltration was. The boy sweated and muttered in horror why something like this had happened in his trial. The enemy looked at him menacingly, radiating an aura, and told him not to hold a grudge since the tower was originally such an unpredictable place. He would rather leave long conversations and end everything. The brunette put out his hand and asked the enemy to stop. The hero frowned and asked him to tell about the floor invasion. The knight silently looked at the boy, but still decided to tell since the boy was dead anyway. Sun Jiun looked closely at his interlocutor. The man said that among the options of the system, the expansion of which occurs from the 8th floor, there is the so-called floor invasion. If you buy a ticket for it in the store, you get the opportunity to interfere with other people's trials. The hero sat opposite the enemy, asking if he really came from another dimension. The knight clarified whether the boy thought that he came from some other world. Sun Jiun stood up and muttered something like that. His eyes lit up from using the Eye of Truth. The man shuddered as he looked at the hunter. Notification: your opponent's words are true. He did not lie. The knight extended his sword and exclaimed that the brunette had just committed an extremely unpleasant act. He dared to judge his words and actions. The hero smiled and replied that he could not do anything about it. The opponent swung his sword and asked how the barbarian brat dared to be insolent to him. The brunette straightened up and said that he had obtained information, so he could also share one funny fact. The interlocutor stopped and looked at him questioningly. The young man was holding his injured hand and said that due to his pain tolerance, the injured limb was practically in his way. In other words, he was holding it not because it was unbearably painful. The hero let go of his hand and the accelerated regeneration skill was immediately activated. The boy healed himself and said that he thought the enemy would only share information if the boy looked pathetic. The knight's eyes widened in surprise. He swung his sword and asked if the hunter was testing his healing skills. The man added that if his strength was only what he had demonstrated earlier, then he would not escape death. Sun Jiun threw the sword from the ground and smiled. The boy grabbed the handle and said that his strength continued to grow rapidly. Notification: increase stats using the spirits you have. Strength increased by 2, agility increased by 3, endurance increased by 3, mana increased by 5, durability increased by 7. Blue energy emanated from the hero. The enemy shuddered and was surprised that the boy had a unique characteristic in addition to the healing skill. The exclusive effect of the assassin's cloak is activated. Movement speed plus 15%. Remaining time, 59 seconds. The brunette crouched, pushing off the ground and, with a flash of his eyes, used instant acceleration. The man stared in shock at the challenger from the 5th floor, who for some reason had so many skills. The hero rushed to attack. The opponents began to exchange blows. The knight recoiled and muttered that it was only the 5th floor, so why did the hunter have such outrageous stats? He touched the sword, accumulating aura, and called the young man a damn barbarian. The brunette frowned, noticing the attack. He dodged, and the sword pierced the rock. The opponent turned and swung the blade towards the young man, cutting the stone. The hero was surprised and jumped. Aura is a high-level skill, so such a blow can cause serious damage. However, the guy was definitely ahead of his opponent in terms of stats, so he easily manages to avoid critical hits. Sun Jiun frowned and thought that the real problem was that armor. The man grabbed the sword with both hands. His equipment was high level, and it couldn't be destroyed by the protagonist's current abilities. The youth jumped up, continuing to strike from different directions. If he continued to strike again and again, there would be a chance. With another swing, the blade of the sword sparked. An electric discharge pierced the enemy. He grunted in pain, trying to understand what it was. Notice: Thunder Sword. 10th chance to apply the lightning effect when hitting the enemy. The brunette smiled and muttered that this was what he needed. The knight fell on his back. The hero approached the enemy. He looked at him carefully and thought that if the armor had a lightning rod function, it would have been more troublesome, but fortunately, his risk was worth it. The man grunted and his body trembled. He looked at the boy and said that he should have won in the first place. The intruder muttered that he was just a challenger from the 5th floor, so how could that be possible? Where did he get so many skills? Sun Jiun squeezed the handle of his blade and said that the other man was very stupid if he relied entirely on his one high-level skill and armor. He swung his sword and said that it was time to meet his end. The man extended his hand and exclaimed that he could give him answers to all his questions. The brunette frowned and said that there was no need for that. The hero pierced the enemy with his sword. Blood spurted. The knight's hand trembled and went limp. The hunter straightened up and thought that it was getting easier and easier to kill each time. He stepped back and swung the blade. If the boy felt awkward piercing someone else's flesh, it would have been a much more serious problem. Notification: congratulations, you have passed the 5th floor of the testing tower. A purple aura emanated from the invader's body. The brunette shuddered and extended his hand, hastening to use absorption. You have absorbed the spirit of the challenger Kada Drax. Mastery increased to 15%. The boy looked tensely at the energy in his hand and noticed that he almost missed the opportunity to absorb his soul. It turns out that if you die in another dimension, you simply dissipate like a mirage. The hero stood in the ravine, not understanding why the reward message did not arrive. Notification: the difficulty level and the reward do not match. The reward content has been completely revised. The young man turned his head in surprise. As a reward for breaking through, the skill 3 absolutes was received. As a bonus reward, you received 75 points. As an additional bonus reward, you received 35 points. The hero was happy that instead of the promised C rank reward, he received an A rank. The invading knight must have been strong enough for the system to consider the difficulty of the completed trial to be much higher than originally stated. Sun Jun smiled and said that he still couldn't believe that he had managed to hit such a jackpot. Entered the waiting room of the 6th floor. You have been healed of all debuffs and injuries. Information about the challenger Sun Jun will be displayed on the trial summary board. The guy walked through the portal and, taking off his equipment, put it in his inventory. One way or another, he encountered an invasion from another dimension. The hero sat down on the floor and thought that the trial tower really could catch you off guard. The hunter tried to save as many tickets as possible for sending questions to the 8th floor. The guy frowned. The system window indicated that the current number of tickets was 5. The hero began to type, deciding that it was time to ask about the floor invasion and whether it was possible to find out about it in advance. Your question has been sent. The brunette winced when he received the reply. He looked at the email in surprise, which had arrived so quickly. It read as follows. Floor infiltration is a system that allows you to enter the trials of a challenger with whom you have a gap of no more than 10 floors. However, you can only invade personal trials, and special and combined trials cannot be invaded. It is a system that expands from the 8th floor and is currently unavailable. The guy frowned and concluded that it was like breaking a ladder for someone climbing. He wanted to scroll down, but a notification appeared that this information was not available on the current floor. Since the request was only half fulfilled, the ticket to send a question would not be used. Sun Jun stared at the system window in shock and realized that the ticket to send a question was not all powerful either. He swiped the screen and thought that he was glad he had saved the ticket. The hero smiled and said that it was time to use the items he had grabbed from the ground. The brunette reached into his inventory and pulled out a chest, a broken shield, and a stone. Notice, use the Kroken Magic Tower's restoration chest to restore this hunter's shield. The remaining uses of the chest have been exhausted. The shield was restored to its original form. The guy admired that the performance exceeded all expectations. Notice, use the Purity Stone. The item shone in the hero's hand. The brunette rubbed his neck and muttered that buying a Purity Stone might seem like a waste of money, but he believed that the feeling of freshness and vigor that comes from bathing was worth a few thousand won. The 6th floor trial will begin in 1 hour and 12 minutes. The hero opened the system menu and decided to check the trial results board and look into the community if he had time. Ranking table: 1 Kim Seung-hoon, 2 max level sword, 3 hunter, 4 Hee Sun-ae, 5 Oh Chun-seok, 6 Princess Sudi. The guy stared at the rankings, seeing himself in 3rd place. He had risen quite a bit from 16th place. Sun Jun touched his chin thoughtfully and asked if this made him any closer to gaining the benefits of a pioneer. He would have to go all the way to the 8th floor to find out. Entering the community. Difficulty high. Players were trading skills that were useful for killing and robbing each other. Someone was indignant that they were animals, not people, since they only thought about someone's death. An argument broke out over this. The chat turned into a field of chaotic madness. The hero stared at the messages, trying to understand what had happened. The mental resistance skills that were being actively traded now have the attractive effect of reducing some mental shock, but at the same time they are a double-edged sword. Even if you use the skill to let go of your heartache every time, it won't change the essence of the problem. Sun Jun frowned when he saw the message. Dear all, did you know that the bastard who suddenly leaked the information about the 4th floor trials changed his name to Princess Sudi? It was the same challenger who spoiled the atmosphere in the 4th floor community chat. The hero remembered that he felt like he was deliberately inciting everyone to fight each other. Sun Jun frowned and asked if it would be the same this time. The guy swiped the screen and muttered that he should remember this person's nickname well. The system asked if he was ready to begin the trial on the 6th floor. The portal opened. The trial of the 6th floor begins. Difficulty high. The theme of this trial is occupation. Remaining time 50 minutes. Condition for successful completion of the trial within the allotted time, capture one of the strongholds in any direction. Condition for failing the trial, the death of the challenger or the expiration of the allotted time. The reward for a successful breakthrough is a random chest. The penalty in case of failure, death. The hero looked ahead, passing through the portal. In front of him was a sea with small platforms fixed to it. The selection of challengers is complete. Work together with your teammates to pass the trial. Sun Jun looked at the portal and, frowning, asked why his teammates were taking so long to appear. A spear flew out of the passage. The guy grabbed it with his hand and pulled it forward. Holding the weapon, the guy appeared. He looked at the brunette with fear and fell to the floor. The hero approached him and said that attacking his own team is unacceptable. The player frowned and said that if the guy entered the community, he should already know what's what. Murder is the easiest way to get achievements. The brunette looked at him in surprise. He squeezed his weapon and asked if the main thing for them was to earn as many achievements as possible, no matter at whose expense. The interlocutor bared his teeth and exclaimed that the hero's hypocrisy was beyond all bounds. He suggested looking around before playing the role of a conscientious and honest person. Screams were heard everywhere. Players were killing team members, shouting that only the tower should be blamed, not them. Someone did not even hide their greed in an effort to earn a new achievement. Sun Ji-eun stood and listened to the cries for help. The interlocutor asked if he now understood what was what, calling him a hypocritical bastard. Someone swung a sword and pierced his comrade. Many were fighting to the death. Someone shook hands, deciding to join forces in such a difficult situation. The girl and the plump guy looked around at those around them. He smiled, glad that he met a person who thought the same as him. She noted that many were committing disgusting betrayal. The interlocutor nodded and said that they should come to their senses. The girl, smiling, plunged the blade into his chest and agreed that they needed to assess the situation with a sober mind. She grinned ominously and smirked that the guy, without really understanding, was shaking his opponent's hand without a drop of doubt. Notification: you have earned the Vile Killer achievement. Durability increased by 1. The young man fell backwards in front of her. The protagonist looked in her direction, and his supposed partner, smirking, said that he, too, was eager to get achievements. He suggested that the brunette stop acting like a saint. The hero silently looked away. The interlocutor grabbed the blade, deciding that his opponent was distracted. He cursed and rushed into the attack, aiming for the eye. Sun Ji-eun did not even flinch. The guy quickly appeared behind the player and pierced him with that very spear. The enemy coughed and desperately wondered what kind of lightning-fast movement that was. Notification: you have earned the traitor achievement. Strength increased by 1. The hero frowned and thought that this was weak. Special and combined trials are just big words. Sun Ji-eun turned around and thought that this trial could safely be called a kind of event especially for him. Here he would be able to improve the mastery of his unique characteristic, and, if he was lucky, maybe even add a couple of new skills to his piggy bank. However, the guy was not going to specifically attack to kill other challengers. The brunette resolutely looked ahead, deciding to simply fulfill the conditions of the trial and fight those who decided to attack him first. The man raised his hand and used Iron Dome, protecting himself with a shield. The sphere expanded. The man smiled and said that this was the perfect trial for him, who had learned water magic. He turned around at the sound and saw the main character running towards him. The guy jumped up and looked carefully at the other player. The man looked up in confusion, wondering who was in front of him. Sun Ji-eun kicked the dome. The magician laughed and exclaimed that it couldn't be penetrated. However, the defense didn't want to confirm his words, breaking under the hero's blow. The guy flew into the candidate's face with his foot. The magician was thrown to the side and fell on his back. The brunette landed in front of him and thought that although his actions were a little cruel, the main thing was the end result. The other candidates glanced at Sun Ji-eun in fear, assuming that he was a ranker who looked like a monster and ran in other directions. The hero sat down on the platform and thought that with his actions he could instill fear in his opponents. The other players ran away from him. To be honest, even though he wanted to earn achievements, he didn't want to make unnecessary kills. Notification: stronghold captured. The capture will be interrupted if someone from the other team enters your territory. Don't let the opponent capture your stronghold. Remaining time: 9 minutes 59 seconds. The brunette crossed his legs and concluded that he only needed to hold out for 10 minutes. He put his hands on his knees and thought that the high-ranked challengers who had immediately confirmed their participation in the next trial without using hearthstones on the 5th floor should already be outside the 6th floor. Most of the people around him were low-ranked challengers, so maybe breaking through the trial would be easier than he thought. The trial on the 6th floor makes you think about a lot of things. Mistrust of others. This is the reality of a low-ranked challenger. The darkness and gloom that the trial tower has nurtured. The guy frowned and thought that the fake sympathy was the real hypocrisy. Even if he managed to distract the opponents by switching their attention to another stronghold, eventually someone would die. Notification: an enemy has entered your stronghold, capture has been suspended. The hero looked back questioningly. A group of 4 people was approaching him. The blonde grinned and noted the confused expression on the hunter's face. He said that in this test, a team consists of 2 people, and 4 people suddenly appeared on his territory. The intruder assumed that the guy probably wanted to know what was going on. The brunette looked at them and said that everything was obvious without his explanation. Sun Ji-eun smiled and concluded that 4 notorious bastards got together and formed a squad of killers to earn more achievements. The blonde grinned and noted that the guy immediately got the gist of it. The challenger added that his sentence would now be carried out. The man bared his teeth and kindly offered the hero to go to the next world. The 2 knights moved to attack. The young man grabbed the sword and assumed a fighting stance. The enemy wizard folded his arms and used heart fusion. The hero shuddered in surprise. By using the unique attribute heart fusion, The challenger Sun Jun now shares the pain of the challenger Kim Jin-han. The magician took the dagger and stabbed himself in the arm. The protagonist gritted his teeth and dropped the weapon, feeling a sharp pain. He looked at the wound with displeasure. The skill pain tolerance is activated. All types of pain are reduced by 15%. The bald man with a shield approached the guy and poured seawater on him. The brunette cautiously covered himself. Notification: you have touched the water of the 6th trial floor. Strength decreased by 10. Dexterity decreased by 10. Endurance decreased by 10. Penalty duration 2 minutes 59 seconds. The boy opened his mouth and noted that, apparently, there was a penalty for contact with water. The opponents were approaching to attack. Both knights swung, striking. The hero thought that this was a terrible deal. Would be for an ordinary player. Sun Jun smiled excitedly. The swordsman swung his blade, but the boy deftly dodged. He raised his hand and said that the strategy of depriving the enemy of a weapon and reducing his stats, admittedly, is pretty good. But they made one fatal mistake. The player looked at the approaching hand in fear. The hunter grabbed the swordsman by the head and stabbed him into the floor, declaring that they chose the wrong opponent. The trio froze in shock. Notification: you have earned the achievement one-hit kill. The skill Contempt for the Weak has been created. The hero straightened up, and the bald knight cursed. Skill: Contempt for the Weak. Mastery 0%. Effect: if the enemy cannot surpass any of the user's stats, strength increases according to the difference in stats. The bald man swung to strike from behind. Notification: all enemy stats are lower than the user's. Contempt for the Weak is activated. Strength increased by 1. The man struck, then looked up in shock. At that very second, the protagonist kneed him in the face. The brunette turned around in the air and kicked the enemy in the head. You have earned the achievement Merciless Killer. Sun Jun smiled. Agility increased by 1. The knight fell to the ground. The blonde gritted his teeth and frowned. The hero moved towards them. The mage looked at his teammate in fear and asked what to do now and whether they should attack at the same time. The swordsman silently slashed his comrade's leg with his sword. The wizard's face distorted in pain, and he fell to the floor with a scream. The protagonist flinched, feeling a pulsation in his leg. The brunette dropped to one knee. Sun Jun breathed heavily, thinking that they only shared one pain between the two of them, but fortunately, there was no real damage. The only problem was that this pain limited his actions. The mage grabbed his leg and shouted, did the man still consider himself a human after such an act? The blade pierced his side. The blonde continued to strike, warning the protagonist not to come closer. The challenger grimaced and shouted that if he took another step towards him, he would slit the throat of this idiot. The brunette straightened up. Thanks to the skill pain tolerance, he was able to move somehow. But the catch was that at such a speed, it was difficult to properly react to the enemy's attack. As expected, there was only one answer. The hunter gritted his teeth and realized that he needed to kill the challenger, who activated heart fusion as soon as possible. The mage screamed in pain from his wounds. The protagonist threw the shield in his direction, cutting off the wizard's head. The guy jerked, feeling pain in his neck, and fell to his knees, trying to breathe. The blonde swung, deciding that there might not be another chance. He jumped, cutting the air with his blade. Sun Jun caught his blade with both hands. The guy looked at his opponent and asked if he was curious about what it was like when the feeling of having your throat literally cut penetrates your entire being. The enemy smiled tensely and muttered that the guy was frostbitten. The brunette broke off part of the blade, grabbed it in one hand and cut off the enemy's head. The blonde, or rather the flying upper part of it, whispered that the hero was crazy. Sun Jun frowned, and drops of blood flew nearby. You have received the Cold-Blooded Slasher achievement. You earned 15 points. Time is up. The stronghold has been captured. The other users began to shout joyfully that they survived. Someone who managed to maintain camaraderie hugged each other. Was it someone's instigation that many people were delighted with the murder at the beginning of the challenge? But in the end, the final winners were those who kept the team together. The hero turned around and noted that there were exceptions. He looked at the guy who was standing there covered in blood and muttering that he did nothing wrong, and that the bastard who couldn't dodge his blow was to blame. The brunette looked at his hand and wondered if he looked like such a monster in the eyes of others. Notification: congratulations, you have passed the 6th floor of the challenge tower. A random draw box will be sent to your inventory as a breakthrough reward. You have received 8,000 points as a reward. Moving to the waiting room. Dark energy emanated from the bodies of the challengers. You have absorbed the spirit of players Lee Song-jun, Kim Jin-han, Song Jin-uk, Han Sik-jun. The guy put out his hand, absorbing the energy. Mastery of the unique attribute Necromancy has reached 100%. The rank increases by 1 level. Necromancy, rank D, entered the waiting room of the 7th floor. The hero exited the portal and noticed that the achievement viewing function was activated. List of achievements: Class S First Return, Class A None, Class B None, Class C One Hit Kill, Class D Cold-Blooded Slasher, Rank E the One Who Endured the Flames, Ruthless Killer, Goblin Hunter, Traitor, Class F None. The guy carefully looked at the system window and said that, as he thought, the first return was not a simple achievement. He poked the screen, deciding to take a closer look. One-hit kill, Class C. The achievement is awarded for killing an enemy with one hit. As a reward, the player receives the disdain for the weak skill. Merciless Killer, Class E. This achievement is awarded to those who consistently kill challengers without hesitation. As a reward, the player's dexterity is increased by 1. Cold-Blooded Slasher, Class D. This achievement is awarded for killing 5 or more challengers in a challenge. As a reward, 15 points are awarded. The hero thought that he really got a lot of achievements for killing. It turns out that if the player earns an achievement, he will receive various rewards such as skills, points, or stat increases. Sun Jun opened the inventory. Random draw box. In front of you is a box tied with a yellow ribbon from which you can randomly take out one item. When you open the box, you randomly receive one of the items from F to B rank. The boy looked at the trophy in his hand and muttered that the reward for breaking through the 6th floor was a bit ambiguous. If the rank ranged from F to B, then perhaps he shouldn't expect much. He pulled the ribbon and decided to pull out the item and start absorbing souls. Light burst out of the box. The hero looked in surprise as someone jumped out of it. The small green goblin did a somersault and landed on the floor. The boy looked at it in shock. Sun Jun smiled and muttered what kind of Pokemon this was and whether it needed to be caught. The creature frowned, looking at the hero. Sun Jun dashed forward, stretching his hand out in front of him. The little animal dodged his palm at the last moment. The boy continued running forward, trying to catch his target. He pushed off the floor with explosive force. In his last attempt, he managed to grab the little animal. The hero smiled and shouted happily. The captured beast opened its mouth wide and screamed. Then it forcefully squeezed the boy's forearm with its teeth. Pain struck the boy's body, causing tears to appear in his eyes. The little beast jumped to the side. It frowned angrily and bared its fangs. The boy went into a furious frenzy and said that the enemy was quite cute, so he tried to be gentle with him. Jumping up, he said that now the little beast could expect no mercy. The boy made several dashes, but his target jumped very high. The hero looked up and thought. A moment later, the beast noticed that the boy had risen to his height. After somersaulting in the air, the boy looked at his target. He frowned and swung his right hand. His fist was approaching the little beast at high speed. The boy struck the beast's head with incredible force, dealing a critical blow. The place where it hit turned red. The little animal crumbled into pieces, revealing a necklace. The system congratulated the boy and said that he had drawn an item corresponding to the highest class in the random draw box. He looked at the prize and said that if it said the highest class, it meant that his item was Class B. The necklace emitted a blue glow. The system said that it was a pendant made of forged iron, which increased the effects of metallurgy skills and swordsmanship by 7%. And when mana was introduced, an exclusive effect of steel defense was activated, but temporary recovery was stopped since man was spent to activate. The young man took the pendant in his hand. He looked at it and thought about its description. He poured energy into it and decided to check the effects. The next second, energy enveloped him. The system reported that the pendant activated an exclusive effect, as a result of which the skin began to absorb 10% of all physical damage. He exclaimed in surprise. The beams of light glinted on the surface of the pendant. The guy thought that this pendant had much better parameters than most class items, because it was equipped with both attack and defense, so it was truly a scam item. Putting it on his neck, he happily said that he did not expect anything from this prank, but ended up hitting the jackpot. Suddenly, he froze in place, noticing the messages there that all his mana was depleted, as a result of which the exclusive effect was disabled. He was confused but frowned and said that this exclusive skill absorbs mana at the speed of light. He tucked the pendant under his shirt and thought that he should save mana to use the pendant at a critical moment. He looked back at the system window and decided to check the status window of the unique characteristic that was recently assigned to rank D. The system asked him if he was ready to begin the trial on the 7th floor. The heroes looked up, not understanding what this was and whether there was usually a waiting period before the next challenge was issued. Standing in the middle of the room, he said that if it was possible to start the challenge a little faster, he didn't see anything wrong with it, and he wondered if the others' waiting time had disappeared. The system reported entering a community whose difficulty was high. The tower ghost asked if they knew that the waiting time had disappeared. Reading other people's comments, he decided that as he thought, everyone could now immediately begin the challenge. He pointed his finger at the system window and thought that no one cared about the waiting time having disappeared. After all, no one was particularly interested in the advantage of being the first mover, and the atmosphere in the community was one of desperately wanting to return home. He lowered his head and wondered if this was because most of them were low-ranking hunters. Looking closely at the comments, he thought that compared to the 6th floor, the manner of communication had changed a lot. He imagined the evil faces of people and thought that all these maniacs have now become quiet, and the next one is a personal test, so, by entering into a dialogue, no one will gain anything. With a calm expression on his face, he decided that he should also be wary of the murderous maniacs who use the lives of their comrades as simple tools for gaining profit, and most importantly, he hit his fist into his palm and said that he needed to develop skills that would not be shaken by any variables. Opening the system window, he looked at the description of the unique characteristic and looked at it in surprise. Raising his eyebrows, he noticed that even more specifics were added to the description of the basic effect. Schematically imagining how souls turn into enhancement, magical power, and a protective shell, he thought that before, the main emphasis was on enhancing skills, but now souls can be used both as magical power and as a protective shell. He waved his hand, opening another window, and said that he hoped that something like an increase in the probability of obtaining a skill would appear, because anything can happen, so the ability to protect the body will never be superfluous. He pulled the sword out of the inventory. Throwing it into the air, he decided to check how effective the spiritual shield was. The hero put his hand to the side and said that he should risk it, because even if he cut off his hand, the waiting room was equipped with a healing buff anyway. The sword quickly spun, approaching him. At high speed, it approached the guy's wrist. The next second, a bright red flash lit up the space. The system reported that the spirit absorbed the damage inflicted on the user. The sword rose into the air again, energy swirled around it. The system also added that the player's soul had disappeared, and the number of souls in possession was 3 out of 30 positions. The young man looked at the hit site in surprise. Smiling, he decided that the effectiveness exceeded all his expectations. Heroes looked at the number of souls in his possession and said that it was better for him not to absorb all the souls, but to always have a couple in reserve to ensure his own protection. Heroes opened the board summing up the results of the trial. The system opened the player ranking table, on which Sunjun was in 4th place. Frowning slightly, he said that he had slipped to 4th place, and but it was a bit of a pity, but it was not so critical, because in order to receive the title of Pioneer, he only needed to enter the top 50. He warmed up and said that he was already tired while checking this and that, but he did not have time to delay further advancement. A portal opened in space. Heroes decided that it was time for him to challenge the next trial. In the darkness in front of him, system windows began to appear, informing him that the 7th floor high difficulty test was beginning, the theme of which would be proof, and 40 minutes were given for completion. The condition of the test was to pass 3 tests within the allotted time, and the conditions for failure, the death of the applicant or the expiration of the allotted time. As a reward for a successful breakthrough, he was guaranteed the skill of Grace of the Wind, and the penalty for failure was equal to death. The young man found himself in the middle of a dark corridor. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, not understanding what kind of place this was, because the atmosphere was completely different from the previous tests. Walking straight, he thought there that he literally did not feel anyone's presence, and this irritated him greatly. His hair began to flutter in the wind. A bright light flashed at the end of the corridor. A wave of glow quickly overtook the young man, transferring him to the first test zone. The hero found himself in the middle of the desert. The system demanded that he prove that he had overcome all his fears. Looking around, he recognized the surroundings. An endless sand landscape stretched out before him. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shook violently. The young man thought that everything was as he expected. In an instant, a giant sand wall rose up in front of him. The young man looked up and realized that it was a sand golem. He remembered that in order to successfully pass, he had to break through 3 trials in the remaining time, and he thought that this space was now a reproduction of the training trial, and this meant that during this trial, the 3 trials that he had already passed would be recreated. He frowned angrily, thinking that he could defeat the sand golem with his eyes closed, and wondered if that meant he would be on the 8th floor very soon. He noticed that a large amount of sand was falling down from the golem's shoulders. The monster was getting taller and taller, leaving the boy at the bottom. The boy looked up, noticing the giant monster, and said that he didn't remember the golem being this big to begin with. A bright light was shining in the monster's eye sockets. The boy smirked and thought that he felt like he had been enlarged 3 times. The golem raised its arm. It swung its right hand, slightly leaning towards the boy. The boy took out the sword and shield from his inventory, deciding to try and hit the empty head of the opponent. He rushed straight towards the golem's strike. Deviating from the trajectory, it ran up the arm. The hero frowned confidently. He quickly climbed up the sand, straight towards the monster's head. Finally, he made a dash and jumped away from the enemy's head. He thought that this was all very strange while he was upside down. Nu looked down at the golem and thought that the sand golem's weak point was the core, but he couldn't find it anywhere, and perhaps the more massive the golem, the deeper the core was hidden in its body. Shin quickly turned around and looked at him. The hero frowned tensely. The next second, the monster's hand was quickly approaching him. The golem grabbed him in midair. Sand continued to fall from his hand. Suddenly, a blue light appeared from his palm. The sand exploded, freeing the youth. The boy looked up and said that since he couldn't deal with the enemy in one blow, he should just cut him into pieces. He rushed into battle, delivering sweeping blows to the golem's body. He landed and slid across the sand. Sun Jiun looked at the wounds inflicted. He smirked slightly and thought that, as expected, he was just cutting him over and over again, and he needed that you did not find and destroy the core. The monster raised his hands and screamed loudly. The boy said that with his tactics he only attracted his anger. The monster sank to the ground, resting his feet on it. His ankles sank into the sand. The hero opened his mouth in surprise, looking ahead. Quickly straightening up, the monster raised his foot to trample the hero. The boy rushed from the spot, surprised at what was happening. He looked back in fear and said that dodging the blow is not a problem, but if that sand wave falls. The monster's foot quickly approached the sand. The boy quickly ran away from the resulting sand wave. He lost his balance when the shock wave caught up with him. A huge sand explosion thundered in the middle of the desert. Dust and sand began to settle. A golem appeared from behind the curtain. The young man was half buried in the sand. He smiled evilly and said that he was furious. Rising from the ground, he looked at the golem. The young man held his sword in front of him. The golem walked towards him, holding his hands in front of him. The young man began to emit streams of aura using 3 absolutes. The system opened the description of the skill. The hero flew past the golem at incredible speed, cutting off its arm. The monster looked back at the lost limb in surprise. Landing, the guy dealt a few more blows. He cut off its arm with just one attack. He immediately remembered the Dark Knight and thought that when he encountered the so-called floor implantation, he was very angry. Smiling, he also added that now he should probably thank that knight for intruding on that trial. The monster's arm began to recover. The hero thought that although this golem was recovering with the help of sand, he should still continue to cut with his sword until his core was found. The monster bowed down, heading towards the guy. The boy challenged him and said that he should try to recover after the next one. With a deft movement, he cut the sand body. A moment later, another cut appeared. The boy ran past the golem, cutting off all of its limbs. The monster began to recover again. The tired guy frowned and insulted him, after which he wondered later where his core was. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. Standing in front of the golem, the boy calmly asked when he managed to become such a cutie. The golem suddenly fell into a stupor. He blushed embarrassedly, hearing for the first time that he was cute. The young man noticed that the golem had shrunk and thought that the resource called sand, which the golem's body was made of, could not be extracted from the environment indefinitely, which is why it had apparently shrunk so much. He looked down and thought of something. A mad smile appeared on his face. He grabbed the sword and asked the golem if it wanted to lose some more weight. The monster opened its mouth and let out a loud roar. Vidya didn't particularly like the continuation. The opponents headed towards each other. The young man turned in the air, approaching the fist. He did a roundhouse kick, destroying the monster's right arm. The hero clenched his teeth hard, quickly moving forward. He rushed past the monster at incredible speed, cutting it into several pieces. The golem's fragments fell onto the sand. He moved his head and wheezed quietly. Having shrunk even more, he restored his body. The golem growled and looked up. The boy frowned slightly when he found the core. He looked at the crystal on the monster's back and thought that the body was covered in a thick layer of sand, so it was extremely difficult to reach forward, and added that he thought about 10 minutes had passed, and there were only 40 minutes to complete the 7th floor trial, and it would probably be better to speed up. Suddenly, he noticed a blow approaching quickly. At the last moment, the boy dodged its trajectory. He continued to dodge the golem's attacks, saying that after the crash diet, he had become much more agile. He rushed behind the monster and said that although he wanted to play with it longer, he did not have time for this. A moment later, the boy pierced the monster's core. The golem opened its mouth and let out a scream. The core shattered into several pieces. The guy frowned. The system reported that he had proven that he had overcome his fear, and the first test had been successfully completed. The golem's body began to crumble to the ground. A bright flash appeared in the air. The young man looked around in surprise, noticing the disappearance of the surrounding space. Frowning, he thought that this was excellent. He stretched out his hand and pulled the golem's spirit along with him. The flow of the soul was attracted to his palm. The young man tried not to let go. A notification appeared above the guy's palm that the absorption had failed. He frowned in confusion and said that the increase in skill had also flown down the drain. The system reported entering the second test zone. The guy found himself in the middle of a burning location. A monster's corpse was lying next to him. The system demanded proof that he had become wiser. He frowned deeply, recognizing the surroundings. An orc village was burning outside and their corpses lay everywhere, that the previous tests were happening again. He lifted the curtain and went outside. The next second, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. The young man noticed that the orc was bowing down in front of his dead comrade. And watching what was happening, he thought that these were orc rangers, and that during the test on the second floor, he destroyed the orc village, so now the subsequent events were unfolding in front of him. Monster touched the artery on the neck of his dead comrade. He sternly looked up at the young man. The orc shook with anger and let out a dull squeak. His eyes were bloodshot. He rose to his feet and let out a loud roar. The young man realized that he was going berserk again, a phenomenon often observed in monsters overcome by anger. He lowered his hands and added that an orc in a berserk state is no longer a hot monster like Irango, so he was very unlucky. The orcs rushed to attack with a battle cry. They were quickly approaching the young man. He frowned sternly and said that they, monsters, should not show the pain of losing a family member. The system reported the activation of the instant acceleration skill and the triple absolute skill. The hero jumped up with explosive force and said that they should not do this, at least in front of him. The orc fell to his knees. The commander of this squad was kneeling in front of the youth, quietly squeaking. The monster was breathing heavily, keeping its head down. Its comrades were lying everywhere next to it. The boy looked at him with disdain and asked the monster there if it felt disgusting, because he was standing there and just watching his family die, unable to do anything. The monster went berserk again. He rose to his feet and swung his right hand. The hero dodged his attack. Energy flashed in his pupils. With a quick dash, the boy decapitated his opponent. He exhaled heavily. The system reported that he had proven that he had become wiser, thus completing the second test. Looking back, the boy thought that this time he could not hesitate. He extended his hand and began to collect souls. He was pulled into the portal again. The system reported the successful absorption of all the orc spirits, as a result of which the mastery was increased by 6% and the number of souls rose to 19 units. The hero clenched his fist with a smile. The system issued a notification that the mastery of the hunter's dagger skill had reached 100%, so the skill had increased to the next rank. Also, the instant acceleration skill had risen one sub-rank higher. The system notified him of entering the third test zone, where he must prove that he had overcome his doubts. The guy looked ahead and said that this time his brain would definitely be blown away. He found himself on a long path in the middle of the water. Greatly surprised, he realized that this was the battle platform of the 6th floor. She looked back and said that since the previous zones were reconstructions of the 1st and 2nd floors, he thought there would be a double from the 3rd floor. He remembered the previous test and said that he was not surprised if such an ignorant test was labeled as wisdom, and he was really going if he hoped to see at least some common sense in the test tower. The young man opened his inventory and took a life potion from there. With a slight movement, he opened the bottle. The guy tipped the bottle over and drank the contents. The potion worked instantly, healing him. He looked at the bottle in his hand. Throwing it into the ocean, he said that he was littering a little in the test tower. A moment later, a giant wave rose behind him. Powerful splashes of water threw up the concrete slabs of the path. The heroes frowned in surprise and said that he only threw a tiny bottle. The system reported the activation of the killer's cloak, increasing movement speed by 15 points. He rushed away from the approaching danger. The boy frowned and thought that the tests that had been played so far were repeating the existing rules, which meant that in order to pass this test, he needed to find and occupy the red tile of the stronghold. The water waves rose up, creating different shapes. The boy also added that until he found the tile, he should not touch this water under any circumstances. Running further and further, he decided that his speed was higher because the wave could not catch up with him. Frowning in surprise, he decided that this was great, because he had to move in the same direction. A powerful splash of water threw the tile under the boy's feet. Falling down, he touched the water, as a result of which his strength, agility, endurance were reduced by 10 points, and the duration of the penalty was equal to 2 minutes and 59 seconds. The water continued to throw up concrete slabs. The guy thought that he even had an idea that the tiles would remain in the same order. Being in the air, he added that it was a kind of hope that there was at least some common sense in the testing tower. He gritted his teeth and used instant acceleration. Leaning against the slab, he made a powerful jerk. With quick movements, he bounced off the next 2 slabs. The guy gritted his teeth and said that he never expected that he could die in such a place. He continued to push off the slabs on his way, running further and further. Noticing a red pad, he headed towards it. Looking at his target, he thought it was the red slab of the stronghold. The guy gritted his teeth and thought that soon, finally, this annoying test would end. The introductory surface swirled into a whirlpool. Several streams of liquid rose into the air at once in order to hinder him. The water spun like a corkscrew and flew over him. The boy said that now the testing tower decided to go completely crazy. He made 2 jerks and headed towards the red plate. Smiling slightly, he realized that there was very little left. The spinning liquid was quickly heading after him. The hero noticed the danger from behind. A powerful blow of the liquid hit him right on the back. The boy's vision clouded over as the water absorbed him. Scarlet energy flared behind him. Streams of dark aura spread through the air. The system reported that the spirit absorbed the damage done to the user, as a result of which one of the orc souls disappeared. More and more energy was growing. It stopped the flow of water. Another orc soul disappeared. The boy looked back and thought that he clearly felt the shockwave, but right before the blow could cause him any damage, the shield blocked it. The hero did a somersault in the air and flew to the side. Having landed, he quickly ran away. The streams of water went after him, when suddenly the remaining time was over. The water froze, the exclusive effect of the killer cloak was turned off. The guy frowned in confusion and thought that now he already had no mana, and if the instant acceleration failed, then it would be the end for him. He gathered scarlet energy in his palm. The hero threw the ball into his mouth. Having pushed it into his mouth, he frowned slightly. An aura began to emanate from his chest into the dark. The system reported that he needed to replenish his mana using the spirit of the orc. The guy thought that this was great, and that his strength had returned. The streams of water, swirling, continued to move. The guy quickly ran away from them. He looked at the red tile and thought that there was very little left. Suddenly, a column of water appeared in front of his face. He opened his mouth in surprise and cursed. The streams of water quickly caught up with him. While he stood in a stupor with his arms crossed, he made a dash forward, wanting to take a risk. The guy entered the liquid. His silhouette began to blur under the streams of water. He broke free from the other side, exhaling heavily. The system reported that the orc spirit had disappeared. The guy was in the air right above the waves of water. Flying down upside down, he bent down heavily. The guy tried to group himself and screamed loudly. He looked at the floor in fear, screaming shrilly. The floor was quickly approaching him. After a little while, the guy hit the concrete with incredible force. 2 orc souls disappeared. He had 12 units left. A large amount of dust rose in the air. The dust cleared. The young man lay in a mark on the surface. He opened his eyes in surprise, noticing something. Swirling waves hung right above him. Their tips twitched, confusing the guy. The system reported that he had proven that he had overcome his doubts. As a result of something, these tests were successfully completed. The water appendage began to lose its shape. A huge amount of water fell on the guy. Being wet, he squinted his eyes and thought that this was a damn test and that it was completed, but for some reason he had to suffer until the last second. Suddenly, system notifications appeared, reporting that he had overcome the 7th floor of the test tower, and as a reward for breaking through, the skill of the Grace of the Wind was received. 15,000 points were awarded and speed boots were sent to his inventory, after which the system reported that he was going to the waiting room. The hero headed into the portal. The spatial gate emitted a light blue light. The young man went to the waiting room. He threw off his coat. Slightly lowering his head, he remembered the past test. The young man frowned deeply and realized that he was close to failure. He bit his lip and thought that in the current situation, he was a little anxious to go to the 8th floor right away, because he did not think that he would continue to be so lucky in the future. Suddenly, he raised his head, feeling a shaking. The system windows opened in front of him. Notifications reported that the number of applicants who passed the tests on the 7th floor exceeded 1,000 people. So the expansion of the system began, the skill store was opened, and an intersection was created in the test, as a result of which a permanent return was possible, and the floor implementation system was activated. Looking at these messages, he thought that this was all what was expected with great impatience, but Cherry Prepare is different. He frowned, noticing the messages that he was the president, who was called the pioneer on all the previous floors, as a result of which he was entitled to choose the halo. The boy imagined a silhouette of a man with bright rays of light coming from him, and thought that the eagle was an advantage that could only be obtained if the applicant had the title of pioneer on all previous floors. He raised his eyebrows in surprise when he saw the system notification that the halo affected the unique characteristics and skills of the applicant, so he had to choose wisely. The young man wondered later, had he ever given the tower such advice, because it must mean that the halo was something important. The system gave him a choice of 3 halos: ruler, hunter, and monk. The hero crossed his arms, looking at this, and said that he needed to read the description first. He opened the description of the ruler's halo, which said no, that this is a halo that has different performance depending on the person, and, in fact, it is closer to the universal type than the specialized type, and is closely related to the unique characteristics of the applicant. The potential is greatly increased for abilities such as combat, growth, support, and production, and the unique strength of skills is the synthesis of skills, so this is the most suitable halo for the current applicant. The youth raised his eyebrows in surprise and said that it affects all skills and even the unique characteristic. Looking closely at the last lines, he thought that the tower was openly saying that this is the most suitable halo for him. He poked his finger at the system window and said that he needed to look at other options. The system opened the description of the hunter's halo, which said that anyone can easily adapt to this halo. It is closely related to improving characteristics and skills, and the effect of the halo greatly increases the level of skill and stats. The unique power is to increase the level, and this halo is also perfect for the current challenger. The hero looked at the writing with distrust and was surprised that this choice was also not bad. He opened the description of the monk's halo. The system said that this is a halo that is strongly influenced by talent and perseverance, and the longer a person invests, the stronger he will become. But this takes time and talent, and if a person does not have talent, all efforts may be useless. The unique power of the halo is the path of practice, and this halo is not recommended for the current challenger. He waved his hands, dividing the system window into 3, and said that this halo is definitely not for him, so he needs to make a choice in favor of one of the remaining 2. So he lowered his hand and decided to choose it. He pointed his finger at the system window. Shining rays appeared behind him. The system reported that he had chosen the ruler's eagle, and the special effect of the ruler's halo launched the evolution of unique characteristics. She showed him the possibility of developing into the field of necromancy and said that he could begin to summon or, as a result, be able to use absorbed spirits to revive powerful skeletons. Then she showed him in the form of a magic swordsman and said that his talent for the sword and magic would increase, and the ability to acquire the corresponding skills would increase 3-fold. Then the system showed him in the form of a blacksmith and said that he could also go the way of the creator, and in this case, the talent for creating items would increase, and the ability to acquire skills related to production would increase 3-fold. The young man looked at these options in surprise. He touched his finger to the system window. They say that he has nothing to even think about. He looked closely at the system windows, reporting that the summoner attribute had been added to the unique characteristics of necromancy. Due to this, some effects were modified, and new detailed effects were added. Then the unique ability of skill synthesis was created. The dark energy swirled and began to gather into the youth. The system opened the status window. The hero stepped onto the floor, happy with the end. He looked down as the energy continued to gather in his chest, and thought that the eagle was finally created. The hero poked his finger at the system window, opening the description of the unique ability, skill synthesis, the effect of which allows you to select 2 desired skills and combine them. And if the skill levels differ during the use of the effect, the skill of the higher rank becomes the center of the synthesis. Sun Jun opened his mouth in surprise and thought that by combining useless skills, you can create something new. The thought flashed through his mind that this was really a jackpot. The system asked him to look at the list of skills and select the material to create the synthesis from the skills currently available. The hero looked at the list of his abilities and thought about what to combine. He touched his chin and began to search for skills that he does not use. The hero chose the skill of contempt for the weak and continue the battle. The system asked him if he wanted to continue. The young man pressed the button and decided to continue. The synthesis window of the bright lit up. The system reported the completion of the synthesis of skills. A bright light illuminated the boy's face. The skill of force breakthrough was created. The young man looked at the description of the skill in surprise. The system reported that the skill allows you to break through unknown forms of restraint, such as skills and unique characteristics, but the user's magic must be higher than the level of magic used for restraint. The hero could not understand how this happened. He thought that he combined 2 lower skills, and that he expected to get an E rank skill, but got a D rank. He smiled happily and decided that this was a really mind-blowing skill. He pointed his finger at the system window. I live to try again. The system asked him to select the material for synthesis again. The hero chose Ranger Training and Burn Resistance. The next second, he again agreed to continue the synthesis. The system window lit up brightly again. The guy smiled impatiently, expecting a new result. A strong eye skill of rank E was created, which allowed one to provide oneself with some visibility even in bad conditions. The guy fell into a stupor and said that, it turns out, the skill created now was only 1 step higher than those chosen for synthesis. He looked up and thought about what the reason for this was. He mentally imagined the 2 previous skills and thought that they went well together. Then he imagined the 2 skills crossed with each other this time and thought that their combination was not the best. From a first glance it was clear that they were completely incompatible with each other. He fell heavily onto the bed. Looking at the ceiling, he said that he had come a long way from holding the status of a pioneer to receiving the reward of the areola, but for some reason he felt a little strange. Lying on the bed, he wondered if he had really achieved everything through his own efforts, or if he had just been lucky with a unique characteristic. The hero was silent for a second. He jumped to his place and decided that he couldn't lie around doing nothing, thinking about all sorts of nonsense, because it would be much better if he checked the reward he had received. He looked at the description of the skill of the Grace of the Wind, the effect of which allowed him to increase all speeds by 10%. The system reported that this skill could be stacked, reproducing up to 7 times. However, when the limit was reached, a 24-hour cooldown would automatically be activated. Looking at the description, he said that increasing all speeds, this is amazing, and he will also be able to stack this skill 7 times, which means, lost in his thoughts, he thought that he would be able to increase any speed by 70%. The hero imagined himself running forward at incredible speed. The young man imagined a bright glow and thought that this skill does not consume mana at all. Sitting on the bed, he said with a smile that the Grace of the Wind is essentially a skill that has no downsides. He opened the inventory and looked at the boots. He put on new shoes. The guy looked at the new thing with a smile. The system reported that these are speed boots that increase attack speed by 3% and movement speed by 5%. The young man said that all the rewards on the 7th floor are related to speed, and he is incredibly happy with this arrangement. Suddenly, the system reported that the skill store was entered and that it displays a list of skills available for purchase. Sun Jun looked at the list and said that, contrary to his expectations, the quality of the store leaves much to be desired, after which he thought that in addition to this, the prices are also incredibly high. He shook his head and was indignant at being asked to pay 8,000 for an instant boost. He pressed the buy button and said that he needed a skill related to magic. The hero imagined coins falling while looking at the messages that he had purchased the magic circuit skill, as a result of which 15,000 points were debited from his account, and he also bought magic resistance for 12,000 points. The system reported that the magic resistance skill grants an effect due to which resistance to magic is created throughout the body. Resistance to other people's magic is increased, but if he does not have the magic circuit skill, the effect is significantly reduced. He recalled the past battle and thought that now that he has the resilience skill, he will not be caught off guard by something like the unique characteristic of heart fusion, which had caused him a hard time in the past. He opened the description of the magic chain skill. His body began to release mana. The magic chain was engraved on his body. The guy gritted his teeth, feeling the heat throughout his body. He began to glow brighter and brighter, emitting powerful streams. The sheet swayed strongly in the air. After a while, it sagged. The guy lowered his legs to the floor. Getting up from the bed, he said that he felt a strong lightness. He took a few steps forward. Sun Jun stopped in the middle of the room. He lowered his gaze. The youth raised his leg, which was covered in mana. A moment later, he slammed it onto the ground, creating a powerful shockwave. Without taking his eyes off what was happening, he was very surprised. The floor under his foot was shattered. The guy thought that the mana used randomly formed a chain and strengthened his physical abilities. He smiled, clenched his fist, and was glad that he made a good purchase. The hero opened the system window. The system reported that he could use the spirit of the deceased to resurrect the dead nearby, and that at the time of resurrection, the level of the dead would be proportional to the quality and quantity of souls absorbed. The youth said that he was curious about this new ability to summon the dead. He waved off the notification and said that it would be better for him to familiarize himself with it in practice. He placed his hands on his waist and exhaled heavily. He pressed his lips together and considered what decision he should make. The hero frowned sternly and said that he should think about whether to challenge the next floor right now or return to the ground. The dark-haired man was looking at his phone, nervously shaking his leg, and was indignant at the fact that there was no response. Suddenly, he noticed that someone had approached him. A plump man with his team approached him and asked the guy if he was able to gather a team. They were sitting next to a giant gate. The man also said that he should hand over the permission to enter the portal to them. He smiled evilly and added that if the raid in the dungeon did not begin after the specified time, the right to enter would be automatically revoked, so he could just take the appropriate fee and hand the pass over to them. The guy frowned tensely, recognizing the guys who had approached him. He raised his head excitedly and said that he had no intention of handing over his pass to anyone. The men immediately insulted him. The interlocutor grabbed his head and said with a smile that there were a lot of hunters in the park, but no one was eager to join his team. Smiling widely, he mockingly said that he was only an E-rank hunter. The young man was stunned when he heard the question of whether he thought anyone would want to be on the same team with trash like him. The man, along with his team, looked at the guy ominously. The surrounding people discussed how he was being too cheeky, but telling the honest truth. Suddenly, everyone froze in place when someone asked if the team was still recruiting. Sun Jun walked through the crowd. He held out his ID and introduced himself. Frowning, the guy asked if this was enough to join the team. The saddened man stood up from the bench and said that he completely satisfied all the requirements. The evil man put his hand on his shoulder and asked if he didn't see the line of people waiting or if he didn't understand what was going on at all. The boy let out a sigh and smiled. The man got angry when he heard the words that if he was unhappy with something, he should also apply for the Qiaowen team. The man was very indignant about this. Suddenly, the guy became completely serious and threateningly told the man to remove his hand from his shoulder before it was broken. The guy immediately released his aura, surprising everyone around him. The man turned pale and immediately removed his hand from his shoulder. He frowned in surprise, wondering what kind of energy this was and if he was really a C-rank hunter like himself. The man's allies admired this energy with a smile, thinking that it was released by their captain. The man smiled nervously and thought that this was not his doing. He put his hand to his mouth, awkwardly saying that since there were representatives from the Hunters Association around, he would tolerate such a prank this time. As he walked away, he said that the boy was just lucky. Qiaowen grabbed his head and wondered why everything was going wrong from the start. He looked up at the boy in surprise. The boy called him by name. The boys were standing opposite each other. The hero said that judging by the situation, he felt like he wouldn't be able to find anyone else to join his team, so they shouldn't drag it out and just enter the portal. Xiaolwen pointed at himself and the boy with a shocked face and asked if he wanted to go in a two-man team. The boys entered. Xiaolwen grabbed the sword and quickly looked back, saying that they actually entered. The hero looked back at him and said that he didn't need to worry about anything so much, since he could deal with most of the D-rank monsters. The other man looked at him in surprise. He raised his hand, looked at the boy and asked if the boy had said before that it was his first time in a dungeon. The boy confirmed this and thought that in essence, the trial tower and dungeons were the same thing. The man frowned and said that at first glance his words might seem tactless to him, but their lives were at stake, so he should listen to him carefully. The boy looked at him silently while the man asked him who he thought had the highest mortality rate in the dungeon, an E-rank hunter or a C-rank hunter. The man frowned and said that at first glance it might seem like the E-rank hunter would be the one most likely to die, but in reality, C-rank hunters had a higher mortality rate. He imagined two fighters and said that E-rank hunters were extremely cautious because they knew they were weak, while hunters of a higher rank were overconfident in their strength. He then imagined the spears killing the second hunter and said that the fatality rate was extremely high for that rank. The man then imagined them getting into an accident in a car and said that the same could be said about driving, since the more confident the driver was, the higher the chance of getting into an accident. He lowered his head and said that a place called a dungeon was much more dangerous than the boy thought. He raised his hand and added that since the boy had risked entering the dungeon without a tank and a healer, he became even more worried about this overconfidence. The hero replied that there was logic in those words. The man looked at his face and added that although he was an E-rank hunter, he had a lot of experience visiting dungeons, so he could take on the role of leader of this group. Sun Jun frowned slightly and thought that he also wanted to be the leader. The man bowed after hearing the agreement and thanked the boy for understanding, then said that he was doing this for everyone's safety, so he hoped his offer did not spoil anyone's mood. Words echoed throughout the cave that they needed to continue on their way. The young man decided to trust him. Suddenly, a lizardman appeared in front of them. The man tensely clenched his teeth and said that these monsters are known for skillfully using various types of weapons, so they were unlucky that he was their opponent. He took the lizardman with both hands and said that for starters, he would draw all the attention of this creature to himself, and the hero would attack him immediately on signal as soon as the lizard opened its back. He watched what was happening, thinking that he needed to see how an experienced hunter would deal with such a situation. He opened his mouth and rushed into battle. The man frowned tensely and ran towards him. Suddenly, they stopped a few meters away from each other. The man began to swing the blade in different directions. He continued to strike the air. The guy suddenly realized what was happening. Watching the captain, he thought that they were now measuring strength. He frowned and added that a temporary return to Earth takes only 3 days, and now he has to lose precious time because of some insignificant lizard. The man suddenly looked back at him. The guy stepped forward and apologized. Because he was forced to intervene, the man tried to stop him, saying that it could be dangerous. The hero jumped up, using instant acceleration. A moment later, he cut the lizard into many pieces. Xiaolwen Balshok, seeing what happened. The young man looked at the parts of the monster and said that he intervened because he was in a hurry. The man looked down at the corpse and said that he understood everything perfectly, because he could have his own reasons for this. The hero also said that he would like to make one suggestion, after which he asked if he could voice his thought. The man immediately nodded and asked to tell everything as it is. The boy pointed at himself and asked him to take the lead. The crowd of lizardmen rushed forward, shouting loudly. The boy rushed past them, cutting down several. The monsters looked back, noticing this. They rushed to attack, but the boy rose into the air, dodging it. Sun Jiun pierced one of them from behind. The man watched in surprise. He looked at the concentrated face of the boy and thought that this was just a one-sided massacre. The lizardman struck again, but missed and cut off the head of his comrade. The hero struck again. With a deft movement of his hand, he decapitated the lizard. The man watched everything with his mouth open, thinking that he probably got to witness the battle of a super rookie who would shake up the hunting industry in the future. The hero plunged his blade into the body of one of the lizards. He took out a green D-rank mana crystal. He threw it into the man's bag with the others. Xiaolwen looked back and said that other than acting as a porter, he was of no use and then apologized for that. One of the lizards approached the guy from behind at incredible speed while he was discussing with the man how much profit each would get. The hero slightly tilted his head, letting the sword pass by. He turned around and swung his left hand. With a single blow, he threw the beast up. He smashed its head against the ceiling of the cave. Rock fragments fell next to the guy. The man grabbed his head, watching in horror. The entire cave was covered in blood. The young man said that they needed to discuss this outside, because if they let their guard down, they could end up in a dangerous situation. He brushed the blood away. The man apologized to him. He began to absorb the souls of the lizards and thought that he needed to pretend to yawn and absorb all the souls at this time. there was an increase of 0.07%, and that with D-class monsters, he would be increasing the mastery of his unique characteristic for a very long time. Suddenly, a scarlet portal opened. The guys looked back at it. The man thought that being only the two of them, they were able to reach the portal leading to the boss room. He smiled and thought that he did not even have a thought about completing the raid on the boss, or to be more precise, from the very beginning he thought that it would be a great success if they overcome at least half of the dungeon. He looked at the guy from behind and added that he thought the man in front of him was quite capable of clearing the dungeon completely. The hero looked back and asked if the man was okay with this arrangement if they were to invade the boss's room now. The man answered in the affirmative and said that the guy should take a break for a while. The young man reassured him, saying that there was no need for that because he was perfectly fine. A man's voice was heard near the portal and he agreed to enter the portal. They found themselves in front of a giant lizard sitting on a throne. The monster rested his hands on the throne. The young man said that as he had predicted, the king of the lizards was waiting for them in this place. The ally looked at him and asked what he was going to do. The hero asked for some time to think. The man frowned anxiously and asked if the guy wanted to say that he had no clear plan of action. The monster immediately jumped up from his place. The guy smiled and said that it happened just in time. The lizard was approaching them at an incredible speed. The guy frowned in surprise. He made a few dashes back, dodging the spear strikes. Dodging another blow, he thought that the monster was very fast and, surprisingly, considering his size. He frowned and looked up at his opponent. The next second the young man found himself behind the lizard. The guy swung his blade and thought that it was not fast enough for him to match the pace of the fight. The monster immediately attacked him with its tail on the body. The lizard threw the guy to the end of the cave. The man grabbed his head and screamed the guy's name in fear. The young man kicked away a block of stone. Dark energy swirled around his body. The system reported that the spirit had absorbed the damage inflicted on the user. The hero smiled and said that this is a good way to test new skills. The man said with tears in his eyes that he thought the guy was dead. The lizard looked at the enemy with an angry expression. Sun Jiun climbed onto the boulder and asked the enemy what had happened and if he cared that not a single stone was left of his throne. The lizard's throne was heavily damaged. The youth asked if he thought it was an ominous omen. The monster threw a copy into the ground and released an aura. Raising its head, it released a powerful beam from its mouth. The youth's limbs were immediately shackled by chains. He was affected by the skill of a slow wave, as a result of which his speed was reduced by 25%. A green sphere cut off the chain. The youth activated a force breakthrough. A pleasant colored energy swirled around his body. The system announced the removal of the slow. The lizard opened its mouth in surprise, noticing this. The guy exhaled heavily and thought that the skill was the result of synthesis, so he had some doubts about it, but the effectiveness was high. Suddenly, the monster turned his gaze to the side. A quiet groan was heard in the cave. The man, bound with chains, fell to the ground and said that his body did not obey. He was scared, but looked at his ally and asked for help. The monster looked at him and growled. The guy frowned in surprise, realizing what was about to happen. The monster turned around and ran towards the man. The hero gritted his teeth, rushed after him and shouted that he was the lizard's rival. Moving at high speed, he tried to catch up with the lizard. Looking at the monster from behind, he thought that the distance was too great. The guy raised his eyebrows in surprise. His pupils turned scarlet, and he used the summoning of the dead. Two skeletons appeared right in front of the monster. They opened their mouths and rushed to attack. The lizard defeated them without much trouble. The guy watched the bones fall and thought that they were not strong enough to stop such a giant, but nevertheless, he was able to win a second with their help. Having summed up the skill of the Grace of the Wind by 60%, he chopped the monster into several pieces and thought that this second saved a human life. The lizard's face froze with an open mouth. The system announced his death. Streams of dark energy gathered in one point. The system reported that the guy used the absorption of the spirit of the Lizard King to permanently increase stats, as a result of which his strength, agility, endurance, mana and durability were increased by different amounts of points. The hero looked at his chest in surprise. The system also reported the absorption of one of the Lizard King's skills, the Spiritual Eye. The man yawned widely. He looked in front of him and said that except for the fact that all three portals appeared at the same time for power, nothing special happened. He looked back at his subordinate and asked if they noticed anything unusual. The interlocutor answered negatively. The leader, looking at the portal, thought that everything was as usual, because after the hunters of the first squad made a partial raid in the open portal and went outside, the attacking team of the Hunter Association would have to break into the dungeon and finish off the boss. He sat down on the back of the bench and said that it seemed like everyone was in the same Hunter Association, but he did not understand why only their team did not have a commission fee. After which he insulted the members of the attacking team and said that he was very jealous. Suddenly his eyes sparkled with anticipation of monetary payment. The man said that if the advanced squad completely cleared the portals in the first quarter, then their control team would be able to get their share. Suddenly, he sadly lowered his eyebrows. Smiling slightly, he thought that this would only be possible within a rank hunter and wondered if there was even one high-class hunter who would pull off such a crazy stunt. Suddenly, Xiaolwen and Sun Jiun appeared from the portal. The leader looked back. Hearing the shout that the advance party of the third portal had finished clearing, the leader was surprised that it was so fast. The subordinate tried to accompany the guy. The leader was surprised that they went to raid the dungeon with only the two of them, meaning that this group couldn't even get halfway there. Suddenly, he raised his eyebrows in surprise, noticing something. The portal behind them began to disappear. He opened his mouth in shock, thinking that the portal that had become colorless meant that. The man smiled widely and finished his thought by saying that the boss's room had been completely cleared. Stumbling, he ran towards the guy. The man, breathing heavily, asked the young man if they had really cleared the dungeon completely. The hero asked him who he was to ask such questions. The interlocutor adjusted his suit and said with a smile that he forgot to introduce himself, after which he gave his name and said that he was the leader of the portal control group from the Hunters Association, who had arrived in this place to monitor the portals that had suddenly appeared in this park. Xiaolwen intervened in the conversation and asked if they had arrived later, that they wanted to buy the rights to occupy the portal. The man confirmed this and said that he wanted to make an offer to the two of them to sell. He raised his eyebrows in surprise when he heard the words that Xiaolwen was not the one who had the right to make decisions in this matter. The leader was very surprised when he was told that the young man had captured this dungeon alone. He recoiled and asked in shock if he really did the cleanup alone, since that meant he was in a rank hunter. The guy interrupted him and said that he was a C rank hunter, and that he thought that was not the most important thing right now, after which he asked him to get closer to the point. He frowned and asked how much he wanted to buy the right to occupy the portal for, after which he thought that if it became known that he came from the test tower, then it would add unnecessary problems. The leader coughed and said that if we return to the main thread of the conversation, then their team wants to propose something. The hero frowned in surprise. Hearing the words, he said that they wanted to buy the right to occupy the portal from them for 1,200,000,000 won. A huge stack of papers fell on the table. The girl sat down heavily on them and said that it was very hard for her, because after returning from the tower, all she did was work like a horse. Suddenly, she noticed something. She picked up the phone and wondered who was calling her at such a late hour. The girl looked at the phone screen in surprise. A little earlier, she looked over her left shoulder. The girl looked at the nameplate with the manager's name. She remembered standing in front of three men who said that without a doubt, this incident would lead to revolutionary changes, and then she thought that everyone at the top was really worried. She held her head and said that even if the applicants were hiding their identities, she still didn't think it would be so difficult to win them over. She looked down sadly. She added that she hadn't even managed to recruit 10 people, and all of these applicants were low level, so it was not enough to satisfy the top management. She looked out the window and said that if she thought about it, she had no idea what that person was doing. She remembered how the boy cut down the goblins one by one and thought that the boy was so strong that it would not be an exaggeration to say that he cleared the 4th floor alone. She touched the glass and regretted that she did not propose to him right away. Suddenly, she was distracted by a notification on her phone. She picked it up and wondered who was calling her at such a late hour. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise, looking at the phone screen. Sun Jiun had texted her and asked if they could meet up if she had already returned. The boy's balance was 1,291,600,000 won. The boy carefully looked at the phone screen and said that he had earned almost 1,300,000,000 won, and he still could not believe that it was true. He was sitting in a cafe, saying that he felt amazing, when suddenly a golden bell rang. The tired girl flew inside. She noticed her hours waving his hand at her. The girl grabbed her head, approaching the table. The guy thought that she ran with all her might and said that she did not have to hurry so much. Sitting opposite him, she said that he did not even answer her message. The guy blushed, hearing the words that she waited for his answer for a very long time. He sweated nervously and apologized, after which he said that he never read it because he was in a hurry. Smiling, she pointed at him with her fingers and said that then he should treat her to a cup of coffee and cheesecake. The hero replied that she could order whatever she wanted. A little while later, a cup of coffee appeared on the table. The guys sat opposite each other. The girl asked if the guy was going to climb to the top floors of the test tower. The hero replied that he was going to continue his climb in the tower. To be honest, he contacted her because he had a request. He looked her in the eye and said that he needed to join a guild so that he could attack a dungeon during his short return from the trial tower, but he had some conditions. He imagined various hunters and said that the first condition was the right to refuse a summons to the guild. He then imagined the trial tower and added that the second condition was not to interfere with his personal affairs related to the tower, and the third was permission to use the guild's dungeons at any time. The young man also asked if there was a guild that would be willing to satisfy all of these conditions. The young man frowned slightly and wondered if the atmosphere was strange and if he had overdone it. He suddenly flinched when he heard his name. The girl tilted her head and said that the conditions he proposed were absolutely impossible to fulfill, since from the guild's point of view, they did not get anything. She touched his hand, interrupting his words about how he had probably asked for too much. She stood up at her place and looked him in the eyes. Their fingers intertwined. The girl said that he could join her guild. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, hearing the words that she would make these impossible conditions feasible. The young man was lying on the roof of the bus, recalling the past conversation. His hair was fluttering in the wind. The young man said that from raiding the dungeon to selling the right to occupy, and plus joining the guild, yesterday he lived an extremely productive day. Looking up at the sky, he said that anyway, to join the ranks of the guild, there was one task left to complete. He suddenly plunged into the memories of the past conversation. The girl said that he should clear a C-rank dungeon alone, because he should demonstrate his abilities, so that it would be easier for her to convince the higher management, because the privilege of free use of the guild dungeons is not available to everyone. The boy looked into her eyes and thought that her words meant that not everyone could bathe in cream using the White Guild dungeon. It had to be at least a rising star or a hunter who had high hopes. He frowned and said that they could prepare everything necessary for the cleanup. They shook hands. The girl added that she would make sure that he would never regret his decision. Standing up, he said that as a warm-up, he thought it would be worthwhile to start jogging from this place. He rested his hand on the roof of the bus. Rising to his feet, he bowed his head. The boy looked up and made a powerful dash forward. People noticed something flying above them at high speed. The girl came to the open gate. She smiled and said that she came to confirm the reservation for the assault on the portal, which would take place in an hour. The interlocutor looked at the tablet and glanced at the girl's ID, after which he said that the attendance was confirmed. He pointed to the resting place and said that there was still a lot of time, so she could sit under this canopy. The girl thanked him. A moment later, she looked back, noticing the guy running up, and in our surprise that she was already there. He looked around. After a little while, the lagging airflow caught up with him. A strong wind began to blow away people and standing furniture. The guy awkwardly adjusted the fallen chairs and apologized, saying that he ran too fast, so it seemed like a shockwave arose. The girl smiled awkwardly and thought about whether he wanted to say that the wind rose simply because of fast running, after which he said that he came quite early. The young man looked at the gate, while the girl wondered what kind of person he was there. She pointed to the portal and said that she had already passed all the checks, so he could let her know when he was ready. The boy replied that he could start the raid right now, because he didn't care. They entered the portal and found themselves in the middle of a wheat field. The guys looked around. The boy was surprised that they were in a field. He turned to the girl and said that if she was in danger, she should immediately let him know this. She replied that she would be completely fine. She touched her chest and presented her necklace, after which she said that she was wearing an artifact that was given to her by the guild because it was an item that had a shield function and a weak invisibility effect. Heian looked at it and said that if she attracted the attention of monsters, she would help him to some extent, so she would try to stay as far away from the battlefield as possible. The hero walked forward, telling her that now he could fight without worrying about anything. He was enveloped in dark energy. The spiritual eye skill was activated. The young man remembered that this was the skill that he received from the Lizard King. He noticed 3 objects approaching. Frowning tensely, he thought that he felt the presence of enemies invisible to the eyes, and added that this is what gives him the spiritual eye. The opponents quickly approached him through the wheat field. The young man watched as they approached very closely. He rose into the air, dodging 3 lizard-like monsters. The monster opened its mouth, looking at him. The girl frowned in surprise, seeing the poisonous fisherman. She took a step forward and shouted at the boy to be careful, because this violated the rules of the dungeon. The young man made several dashes, destroying each of the opponents. The monsters' bodies fell next to him. The girl's mouth opened in surprise, thinking about what she had just seen, because it was some kind of madness. She smiled happily and noted that she had always known that she had made the right choice. The young man continued to fight the monsters running out of the portal. He cut one of them, making a dash to the second. His sword began to emit golden energy. The hero looked away and thought that the appearance of the lightning effect was so rare that he had completely forgotten about its existence. One of the monsters was quickly approaching him from behind. The young man dodged at the last moment, noticing the clenched jaws of the enemy. He grabbed the lizard by the tail. Swinging, he sent the monsters to the ground. The young man hit the floor with the lizard. Straightening up, the guy looked at the monster's body. He waved to the girl and said that he had more or less restored order nearby, so she could calmly approach. The girl thought with her mouth open that he had reached the portal leading to the boss room in less than an hour, and alone at that, but the most surprising thing was that they were now in a dungeon that violated the rules. She remembered the appearance of the monsters and thought that the poisonous fissure was a monster that should not be taken lightly. She looked at the corpses of the monsters and added that one of the monsters recommended for group attacks, even for those same C-rank hunters, is the poisonous fissure, so she still can't believe that he dealt with such a monster so playfully, as if there was a helpless baby standing in front of him. She looked at the guy's back and said that this was far from the limit of his growth. The young man headed towards the portal. The girl added that it was impossible to even imagine what he would show in the future. The hero began to collect the souls of the killed opponents, increasing his stats. He raised his head and thought that with this level, even the boss would not pose much of a threat to him. He looked at the portal and said that they would go to the boss's room. After going inside, they found themselves in a dark and foggy place. A slight light was breaking through the gap between the rocks. The woman called it a little strange. A magic projectile was approaching them from above at high speed, while she was talking about how they had already gone far, but the presence of the monster was still not felt. Suddenly, they raised their heads, noticing the danger. The guy frowned nervously. The monster struck. The guy thought that it was very dangerous. He pulled the girl out from under the monster's attack and ran away. Heian looked at his face in surprise. The beast opened its mouth and began to collect mana. He released a powerful beam of energy. Heian pointed her hand at the danger and told the boy about it. Suddenly, a powerful explosion thundered. The hero, along with the girl, jumped out of the smoke. The boy stepped onto the stone floor. He crouched down and said that he had moved her there without her consent because the monster looked extremely dangerous, so he hoped for her understanding. The girl got off his hands and said that it was the other way around, because now she was in his debt. They looked at the monster that was looking for them. The boy said that he would leave her to deal with the beast. The girl turned around worriedly and asked him to stop so that she could use the enhancement skill on him, because they could test his personal skills later. He stepped into the abyss and said that he would not agree to that. Frowning slightly, he also added that he would be back soon. The boy fell down like a soldier. He landed right in front of the monster, breaking through the stone floor. The monster opened its mouth and bared its teeth. Sun Jiun ducked, frowned, and activated instant acceleration. The beast planted its foot on the floor. The hero also used the exclusive effect of the speed boots. The opponents prepared for battle. The beast once again accumulated energy in its mouth. The guy raised all speed by 70%. He jumped up from his place and went on the attack. Having run past the monster's face, he did not even look back. The beast turned its head after him. The young man used 3 absolutes and began to strike, cutting the flesh of the beast. Severed body parts began to fall to the ground next to it. The girl watched what was happening from the root of a tree. The system announced the victory over the dungeon boss and said that in 3 hours the dungeon would collapse. The girl smiled and laughed nervously. Looking at the guy, she said that now she was completely confused about who was the monster in this place. They headed towards the Scarlet Portal. The guys went out into the field. The girl said that she never expected that he, being a C-rank hunter, would clear the dungeon so quickly. She folded her hands behind her back and added that he had passed the tests and could now use the White Guild's dungeon, because their guild was not so stupid as to miss out on a talent like him. The hero replied that he was pleased to hear that. The woman turned around and said that she would digress a little from the main topic of the conversation. She presented 3 levels of difficulty and said that when he was summoned to the tower in a trial, the difficulty he initially chose did not matter much, because even at low difficulty, those who showed good progress in passing the trials would face increasingly difficult tasks as the number of trials increased. She schematically presented the exchange of difficulty between high and low levels, after which she added that there was also a reverse process, because even at high difficulty, if the result was lame, the applicant could gradually slide down to low difficulty. She looked to the side and said that based on this principle, the fact that he had achieved such an impressive growth could only mean one thing: his difficulty level in climbing to the top of the tower. The 3 past trials flashed through the boy's memories. The girl finished the sentence by saying that his level was deadly among the top 50 participants on the summary board. She lowered her head and said that therefore she hoped that he would try to be a little more careful. The hero was very surprised to hear her say that she would like to accompany him for as long as possible or to mature his amazing growth with her own eyes. Sun Jiun was sitting on the roof of a building in the middle of the night. He took a bite of an apple, smiling widely. He said that for the past 3 days, he had really been spinning like a squirrel in a wheel. In 5 minutes he would be transferred to the trial tower. He raised his head and thought with a smile that thanks to this, both his stats and his self-confidence had grown. After his reflection, time and glass. A spatial tunnel opened in the sky. The young man began to return to the tower. He smiled widely and thought that he was returning again. Having appeared in his room, he decided to begin his test. The guy poked his finger at the system window, confirming the start. The system opened a dialog box and asked which test intersection point he wanted to choose: tactics, combat, or capture. The young man raised his eyebrows in surprise and thought that if he thought about it, he had seen a mention of creating an intersection point. He chose combat and added that if he wanted to increase the effectiveness of necromancy, then he should go into battle. The system reported that all personal tests of the applicant were focused on combat, and after choosing a point, it could not be changed. Standing in the middle of the room, he noted that he had not intended to change it, and now he no longer needed to choose anything. The system reported that the applicant had the qualification of a pioneer. The young man raised his eyebrows in surprise. He silently looked at the message that the administrator's private chat was about to open, and the search for an administrator specializing in combat introduction was currently in progress. After a short while, the system completed the search. The boy's body was engulfed in system energy. It reported that a consultation with the Steel Blood Lord, the manager of the combat intersection point, had begun. The hero was transported to a snowy field full of lonely swords. Looking up, he wondered where he was. The system reported that he had entered the Steel Blood world. The system message notified that the search was complete. Consultation with the Steel Blood Lord, the manager of the combat intersection point, is beginning. Sun Jiun looked surprised, after which he landed on the field among the swords. Raising his head, the hero wondered where he was. The message notified that he had entered the Steel Blood world. Many blades were stuck in front of him. The pupil changed after using the Eye of Truth. The system message notified that the skill was activated. The Iron Blood World. Ranking unknown. A space created specifically for her, the administrator of the Iron Blood Lord, a place where uninvited guests cannot look in. The hero smiled and thought, such a place also exists. Sun Jiun began to walk forward, reading that the administrator of the Iron Blood Lord was unhappy with someone making inquiries. Looking closely at this message, he thought, does this mean that administrators can communicate their intentions through direct messages? One of the swords nearby burst into flames, after which he went forward. The system message notified that the administrator Lord Ironblood said to stop wasting time and asked to follow the sword. Sun Jiun looked at this in surprise, so he continued to follow the blade, after which he left this field. Steam came out of his mouth when he breathed. He found himself at the entrance of the house. Coming closer, he opened the door slightly. Looking inside, the hero saw something in front of him. Administrator Lord Ironblood was looking at him. Inside, there was a girl who told him that he had finally come, and she greeted the pioneer. She looked at the hero with a smile, saying that she was the administrator who was assigned to conduct a consultation with him. That same Lord Ironblood. She sat with her legs crossed. Sun Jiun looked at her carefully, thinking that in appearance she looked like a foreign beauty. But he saw her bright aura, realizing that in fact, in front of him was the creature that controls the trial tower. Suddenly, the girl appeared in front of his face, after which she reached for the bottle on the shelf, saying that she was curious about what this monster looked like, and she would say that it was pretty good. The hero thought in surprise, when did she manage to get here? He was staring at her non-stop. The hostess of the house went to the fireplace. Sun Jiun asked if she knew him, and she answered of course. The trial on the 4th floor was quite impressive. The drink was filling the glass when the guy asked if she had been watching his trials all this time, to which the girl said that she only knew about what happened from the data of the final report, because it is impossible to watch the trials of candidates below the 8th floor. Sun Jiun's eyes grew bigger from surprise. He thought about the fact that she is an administrator but cannot watch the trial. While stirring the contents of the glass, the girl also said that judging by his expression, she thought he had misunderstood something. Administrators are not omnipotent beings like the gods, and they do not control the tower at all. The blonde took a sip from the glass, saying that he should not be too nervous in her presence. Sun Jiun silently looked at the interlocutor, who also said that as long as she obeyed the tower, she could not harm him. But, glancing at him, the girl decided to close this topic and said that this personal consultation was an advantage he had earned. If he had any questions, he should not hesitate to ask. Sun Jiun frowned. He thought that he definitely did not feel any hostility. There was a blizzard outside. The hero asked if she could explain what this personal consultation was, and the interlocutor said that, as mentioned earlier, a personal consultation was an advantage that a pioneer would receive. Sun Jiun recalled the armored enemy, saying that on the 5th floor, he almost died at the hands of a challenger from another dimension. Why did he come to him? Looking at her glass, the girl said with a smile that there was no special reason. Looking at the interlocutor again, she also said that it was because when entering a certain floor in another world, an intruder could not only steal the reward for the challenge of that floor, but also gain more favorable advantages. The fireplace was burning brightly in the room. The interlocutor also said that challengers from other worlds come from where the tower had existed for decades. They are well aware that the reward for harming a challenger from another world is incredibly large. The hero was surprised to hear that they also knew that the tower of this world would one day be united with the towers of other worlds, and asked her again what she meant. but she only said that everything is as it is. She presented a scale where the progress of the Earth dimension trials rose, while the invasions of other dimensions remained below. The fair-haired girl explained that starting from the 20th floor, the main focus was on combined trials, not personal ones, and then he would have to meet with candidates from other worlds. Looking at his interlocutor, the hero thought why this looked like an attempt to eliminate and advance a competitor whom he would have to meet one day. But, putting down the glass, she asked if she had satisfied his curiosity. Opening his mouth, the hero noted that if you do not take into account the last question, then you can say so. Then he lowered his head and asked about the trial tower, what kind of structure it was. Then the girl lowered her head and remained silent. Walking away from the table, she nevertheless answered that she herself would like to know the answer to this question. She looked thoughtful, hearing that she was the administrator of the tower, but did not know the answer to this question. Her own silhouette was visible in her eyes. The girl said that originally, the so-called administrators were just like him. The applicants who died after passing the 40th floor were given the right to be reborn as administrators. She had once climbed the tower to see the end. However, she could not reach the top of the tower. No, she remembered herself covered in blood, saying that it would be more correct to say that all the administrators died before reaching the end. That was how she became an administrator. Sun Ji-eun clenched his fist and asked if she wanted to say that the administrators were just former applicants. He looked at the floor, saying that he hoped that she knew something about the top of the tower after all. Hearing this, the girl frowned and looked at him. Then she grabbed him and lifted him off the floor. Holding him with one hand, she said that the words about the top of the tower were not something that could be said so frivolously and carelessly. Sun Ji-eun looked confused and just kept silent, but she noticed with a smile that he was not particularly puzzled and asked again if he was scared. In response, the hero simply lowered his head, saying that it was because she herself said that a personal consultation was his advantage. In addition, he did not feel hostility from her, after which, his fingers dug into the wall, and the next moment, he broke it and found himself on the street. At that moment, a blade appeared in his hand, and he said that he did not intend to let her harm him so easily. The girl was very surprised. Meanwhile, snow was falling on the roof of the house. She began to go outside with a smile, saying that she had been living for many years, and for the first time she saw the one who destroyed the administrator's residence. But his actions convinced her. The hero only looked at the interlocutor with incomprehension. Then the girl looked closely at Sun Ji-eun, calling his name. But he was confused when he heard that she was offering him a patronage contract. A new system message appeared about entering the waiting room on the 8th floor, after which, the hero found himself on the bed. He was still surprised, after which he stood up and opened the window of the exclusive store. A screen appeared in front of him, which wrote the skill category, strength category, item category, contracts Lord of Iron Blood. He was surprised, telling himself that he really made a contract with the administrator. The girl with blonde hair held a scroll in her hand, saying that she could not pass up a candidate who was both talented and brave. The system message asked if he wanted to sign a patronage contract. The hero clicked yes, and the contract was concluded. An exclusive contractor store will be opened, where special points will be available to him. As a special benefit provided by the contractor, all stats will be increased by 1. With a wide smile, the girl said that it was fun, and said goodbye until we meet again soon. A finger pressed the strength button, opening the strength category in the exclusive contractor store. A new screen showed the strength category. List power purity of mind, power steel soul, power king of winter. Looking at the screen, the hero thought that there is also a level of this category of the store. Is there a difference between just power and the unique power obtained on the 8th floor? There were page switches at the bottom, and the hero decided to check them. But a new message appeared that he does not have sufficient rights to view the current list of powers. He can view the list of powers in the waiting room on the 10th floor. Looking at the screen, the hero wondered what happens. At the moment, only these 3 powers are available to him. Information about the power of purity of mind appeared in a new window. Price 1000 SP. Description: in any situation, there will be the ability to think rationally. Status anomalies such as anger and confusion are halved during the fight, and combat immersion increases. Power Steel Soul. Price 6500 SP. Description: this is the soul that some lords were born with, who are said to have neither blood nor tears. Increases the mastery of all weapons by 2.32 times. All newly learned combat skills start with 10% mastery. The Power of the King of Winter. Price 800 SP. Description: this is the power that the rulers of the north often receive. In cold conditions, stats are temporarily increased. There is no suffering from the cold. Puzzled, Sun Ji-eun thought about how ambiguous it was. Somehow, perhaps it would be better to save up a little SP, but he still pressed the button, deciding no. New notifications appeared, saying that he had purchased the Power of Purity of Mind. 1000 SP written off. Description: in any situation there will be the ability to think rationally. Status anomalies such as anger and confusion are halved during combat, and combat immersion increases. Sun Jun remembered climbing a cliff, thinking about the power that allows you to reason sensibly in any situation. Then he clung to the ledges with his fingers. It is better to raise your survivability bar this way than not prepare for anything at all, because there is a chance that he will face a floor invasion right now. A portal appeared in front of him asking if he is ready to begin the test on the 8th floor. After that, new messages appeared. The test on the 8th floor begins. The difficulty is high. The theme of this test is destruction. The condition for successfully completing the test is to defeat the Lick who summons skeletons. The condition for failing the test is the death of the challenger. Failure condition for the test, all stats +2. The penalty for failure is death. Sun Jun looked down at his feet in surprise. Countless skeletons were visible from the cliff. Why were there so many? Watching this, the hero wondered if this was an attempt to overwhelm the enemy with numbers. An army of skeletons was looking at him below, and Sun Jun decided it was time to begin. After which he jumped off the cliff. He pushed off with his foot. Upon landing, he created a large shockwave, but other enemies surrounded him. One of the skeletons attacked the hero. The others also tried to strike, but Sun Jun stood calmly, saying that, as expected, they could not even penetrate his basic defense. After which he himself struck them. New system messages appeared. Mastery increased by 0.08%. Sun Jun lowered his eyebrows, only 0.08%. How annoying. Each swing hit multiple skeletons, increasing his proficiency. Holding his fists to his face, he decided that there was no point in increasing his proficiency during this trial. Standing on the battlefield, the hero suddenly heard a voice asking who he was. What kind of bastard dared to cause trouble in the shrine? Sun Jun turned around. Looking into the distance, he wondered if the voice was coming from there, and, raising 2 fingers, he used Summon Dead. The fallen skeletons rose again. He absorbed the souls to summon skeleton soldiers. In possession, 1/30. One of them took a stone in his hand. Then he struck a similar skeleton. Sun Jun looked at this in surprise, saying that he did not know before that skeleton soldiers were also quite usable. Rubbing the back of his head, he decided to let them deal with these weaklings, and he will go for the boss's head for now. The skeletons watched as the hero rushed forward. New messages notified that the skill Grace of the Wind had been activated. All speed increased by 60%. Current stacking progress is 6/7. The exclusive effect Speed Boost C+ was applied, instantly increasing speed. Sun Jun flew over the countless army of the dead. Landing behind them, he continued on his way. A building was visible in the distance. Looking at it, the hero realized that the voice was coming from there, after which he rushed forward again. There stood a skeleton wearing a crown. Having caught up with him, the hero stopped in front of him. Smiling, Sun Jun was glad that he found him. Eyes glowed from the sockets. The enemy told him that an insignificant human dared to cross the threshold of the sanctuary. Opening his book, he declared that he would make him pay in full for his impudence. Several large monsters appeared near him. Raising his head, the hero thought, is he even capable of commanding sand golems? Looking at the hero, the skeleton asked, did he now realize whose sanctuary he dared to enter? The large monsters were standing near the main enemy, but Sun Jun asked again, could he not summon someone stronger? Taking out his blade, he also said that if he simply did not have stronger exhibits in his arsenal, he would be disappointed. These words angered the enemy, and pointing at the hero, he said that these guardians would be quite enough to tear him to shreds. After which, the monsters rushed to attack. A new message notified that the instant acceleration skill was activated. The hero suddenly moved forward. With lightning-fast movements, he cut off the giants' heads and appeared near the main enemy. Pulling his hand back, Sun Jun swung and struck. A new message notified that proficiency had increased by 1.2%. Pleased with this, Sun Jun placed his hand on his chest, thinking that the undead definitely greatly increased his proficiency. The legless skeleton sat on the floor, wondering where the hell this monster came from. In his eyes, the hero was tall and had bright red eyes. Walking up to him, Sun Jun raised his blade again, thinking that it was time to end. But at that moment, something caught his eye. He noticed a book lying on the floor, thinking that if he looked at the situation, the Lick was freely summoning various monsters. With a wide smile, he thought that maybe he could master this skill too. Then, he threw the book to his enemy. Standing in front of him, he asked if he could summon the guardians again. The skeleton asked why he was asking him such a question. Then the hero approached again, saying that if he couldn't, then they would end on this note, but the frightened necromancer said that he could do it. The skeleton, looking scared, heard the question when he would finally be able to summon them and replied that he would be able to summon them again a few minutes after the guards died. A monster was lying nearby with its head cut off, the hero clarified, so he could already start summoning. The skeleton answered yes and asked again why he needed it. They were no obstacle for him. Sun Jun did not explain and simply raised his blade, saying that it had already tired him out, to which the skeleton opened his book, saying that he would start summoning right away. Raising his hand, the skeleton began to summon the guards. Two monsters rushed to attack again, and with a swing of his weapon, the hero quickly dealt with them. Sitting in front of the hero, the skeleton asked if he was satisfied. Placing his blade on his shoulder, Sun Jun only replied that they had just begun. Kicking him with his foot, he demanded that he summon all the skeletons that had not yet died here and put all their strength into these guards. After which the monsters lost their heads again. Bright traces split them. Another one cut them into pieces. The skeleton looked scared, asking how long he had to do all this. Sun Jun continued to kill the summoned creatures. He answered with an evil smile that he would do it until he told him to stop. The guard pointed his fist at Sun Jun. The hero simply held his finger out in front of him. He easily managed to stop the large monster's hand, after which it quickly ran up his arm. A few swings and the head was cut off. Mastery increased by 1.2%. The giant's body fell to the ground. The system reported that the mastery of the unique attribute Necromancy had reached 100%. Sun Jun looked at the glowing light in surprise. The rank of the unique attribute Necromancy had increased by 1 level. Smiling, he thought that Necromancy was now also C rank. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the words that he was crazy. The skeleton lay on the floor, saying that the hero was a scumbag who would make even the devil tremble. He would curse him even after death, and then he let out a wheeze. The hero approached his captive, thinking that the fact that he had more and more cracks with each summoning indicated his imminent death. Taking the sword back behind his head, he told him that it was a pity he wanted to use it a little longer. From the swing, the skeleton's head flew off. His last words were that meeting him was the most disgusting thing that happened to him. System messages appeared. The hero received the achievement A Person Who Surpassed the Devil. Dexterity increased by 1. Absorbed the Spirit of the Lick. Mastery increased by 17.4%. At this moment, the hero extended his hand, absorbing the red energy. More messages appeared. Passed the 8th floor of the Tower of Trials. As a breakthrough reward, all stats increased by 2. Received 30,000 points as a breakthrough reward. Received 700 SP as a breakthrough reward. Received 300 SP as an additional breakthrough reward. A blue portal appeared, moving to the waiting room. New messages notified, entering the waiting room of the 9th floor. The system expansion begins. Admins will be able to observe the trials. The restrictions on answering questions have been removed. It becomes possible to purchase C-rank skills in the skill store. The status window opened. Strength 67, Agility 66, Tenacity 63, Endurance 66, Mana 53. Unique characteristic Necromancy C, Unique power skill synthesis, Power purity of mind C. The hero stood in front of the screens. One of them had a description of the unique characteristic. Necromancy C mastery 0%. Basic effect is the ability to absorb the souls of the dead to strengthen and supplement either stats or mana. Additional effects 3. When absorbing the spirit of the deceased, there is a 20% chance that one of the skills imprinted in the soul will be acquired. Additional effect 4 is the ability to use the souls of the dead to protect the body. However, at this time, the amount of energy consumed by the protective shell will be proportional to the strength of the blow. Additional effect 5 skill absorption of the soul of the dead, the ability to completely inherit its mastery. Sun Jun smiled and pointed out that skill absorption itself is cheating, so now you don't have to level up the skill mastery from scratch. The screen said that when absorbing the spirit of the dead, there is a 20% chance that one of the skills imprinted in the soul will be acquired, and he realized that the probability of skill absorption was open. Swiping the screens, the hero reasoned that the trial of the 8th floor ended quite smoothly, but there is no guarantee that the trial of the 9th floor will be the same. He should clearly prepare thoroughly for the next trial on the 9th floor. Afterwards, he examined his blade, deciding that he thought the sword could still be used, but the problem was in the shield and skills. The blue screen showed the following description: Skill, Hunter's Dagger O Mastery Max. Description: a practical technique created by hunters for effective hunting. The effect when using a dagger is that the cutting power of the weapon increases by 1.5 times and knowledge of dagger techniques increases. Looking at this, our hero thought that since he had brought the skill to the maximum, he had reached the point where he needed a replacement sword skill. After that, new windows opened and the skill store was entered. Displays a list of skills available for purchase. Sun Jun ran his finger across the screen. Scrolling through the contents, he realized that his hopes were not justified. There was nothing worthwhile here. After which, frowning, he said that if there was no skill, then he would have to create it. Gold coins rained down when he bought the basic fencing E skill. 25,000 points would be deducted from his account. A new window reported the skill Basic Swordsmanship E Mastery 0%. Description: General Swordsmanship, containing the basic techniques of all swordsmanship. Effect: increases basic knowledge of all swordsmanship and increases cutting power by 1.5 times when using swords. However, this increase in cutting power does not overlap with other effects of weapon techniques. A basic swordsmanship skill that increases the ability of swords, he thought. Manipulating the blue screens, the hero thought that if he was going to increase the rank of the hunter's dagger through skill synthesis, he should predict the combination compatibility as best as possible. Among the current skills he has, the most compatible is basic swordsmanship, right. On the screen was an image of the hunter's dagger and basic swordsmanship skills. He selected 2 skills. New system notifications reported that the ranks of the synthesis materials do not match each other. The synthesis of the new skill will be carried out around the dagger skill. Hunter, there is currently a 75% chance that a higher level skill will be synthesized. As he wished to continue, the hero pressed his finger on the screen. A bright message appeared and a notification that skill synthesis was complete. A new skill was created. A bright light illuminated Sunjun, and the skill Demon Slayer C was created. The skill icon and description appeared. Skill Demon Slayer C Mastery 0%. Description: a hunting swordsmanship art designed to kill demons. The main effect increases the basic knowledge of all types of fencing and increases the cutting power by 3 times when using swords. However, the increase in cutting power does not stack with the effects of other weapon techniques. An additional effect: when fighting non-humans, your attack speed is doubled. Looking at this, the hero thought that this adds attack speed when fighting non-human creatures. It seems that this skill is simply made for hunting monsters. He smiled, because, as expected, skill synthesis is a good ability. There were several ability cards in his hand, and he thought about trying to synthesize the remaining skills. Continuing to tap the screen, Sunjun said that he checked the skill compatibility and the probability of synthesis. Several new windows appeared. Accelerated regeneration plus resistance to the laws of nature gave Iron Blood regeneration. Iron Blood regeneration and pain tolerance gave Ash Blood. At this moment, the glow became brighter. The hero looked in surprise. A new description of the Ash Blood skill appeared on the screen. Description: the main racial trait with which a mutant vampire is born. The user's recovery effect increases proportionally to the user's durability. Regeneration increases 3-fold when dealing physical damage. Depending on the damage dealt, up to 40% of pain is blocked. His eyes grew bigger in surprise. Sunjun thought that a 3-fold acceleration of regeneration is already cheating in itself, and the skill also blocks pain. After which he took the weapon in his hands, saying that since the waiting room was equipped with healing, he would not be able to properly test this skill. Also thinking, however, 120 points were not a burden to him at all now. After which the messages appeared again saying that the waiting room's regeneration effect was removed. 50 points would be deducted from the account. Fatigue would accumulate, and he would not recover from physical damage. The guy raised the sword above his head, thinking that since all the spirits had been absorbed, the shield would not activate in any way. The swing left a bright trace. He decided to start the test. Drops of blood flew to the sides, but his hand looked whole. He injured himself again and again, but after raising his hand, it was unharmed. Looking at the green glow, he realized that this was an amazing ability. Even being outside the waiting room, he essentially seemed to be under eternal healing. Adjusting his sleeve, he also thought that in addition to this level of regeneration, he also had a spiritual shield. To be honest, he no longer needed this tin can called a shield. Facing the wall, he still realized that he had to use it until it broke. Then he opened the community tab. Scrolling through the screen, Sunjun said that it seemed that there was nothing worthy of his attention. Then a portal opened in front of him. The time spent in the waiting room was coming to an end, so there was no point in dragging it out. New system messages appeared. The entrance to the 9th floor of the trial tower was completed. The difficulty is high. The theme of this trial is fighting. The remaining time is 1 day. The condition for successfully completing the trial is to kill all the monsters in the arena within the allotted time. The condition for failing the trial is the death of the challenger or the expiration of the allotted time. The reward for successfully breaking through the skill Animal Instinct. The penalty in case of failure is death. But then a warning appeared. The window said that the challenger Sunjun's trial on the 9th floor is currently unsafe. Confirmed floor infiltration of the Muram World Challenger. Confirmed theft of the trial target by the Muram World Challenger. The hero appeared in front of another person. He frowned upon seeing him. The person stood on top of the defeated monster, saying that the hero had finally arrived. The trial target was changed. The man in white said that he was the commander of the Muram Union, Sunhak. A new window informed him that he needed to be killed. The gray-haired man stood with his head down. A challenger from another system. The hero silently looked at his opponent when he asked his name. Looking at the man in front of him, Sunjun asked why he was asking his name out of the blue. The man replied that he had already revealed his name and position. Frowning, the hero said that the man had not invaded his floor with good intentions, so what was the point of introducing himself? To which Sunhak, without opening his eyes, replied that there was some etiquette between swordsmen, but his thoughts were clearly limited. Without taking his eyes off his opponent, our hero thought about how it happened that there was not a single normal warrior among the contenders from other systems. But the man took out his weapon, saying that it would be so. Since the hero wanted to hide his name, there was nothing he could do. Then he rushed to attack. His sword left bright marks, after which many magic blades appeared around him. System messages notified that the hero had activated the skill Grace of the Wind. All speed increased by 30%. Current summation progress is 3/7. Sun Jiun looked ahead and concentrated. Using the ability, he began to repel the attack, after which the opponents retreated from each other. Taking his blade away, Sunhak said that it turns out that there is such an experienced warrior in this dimension. Our hero looked at him and heard an apology for looking down on him, after which Sun Jiun just exhaled. The old man was surprised when he heard him stop being hypocritical. Thick smoke gathered around them, and Sun Jiun said that he was here to kill him and steal his reward. He came here with such an intention, after which Sun Jiun's eyes turned red and he asked why he had to act polite. Sunhak stared at the protagonist, saying that perhaps because they were from different worlds, they could not understand each other, after which the old man raised his weapon and dispersed the smoke around him. His blade glowed, causing a storm. The man only said, "Let the earth rest in peace," a swordsman whose name he does not know. A message appeared, notifying that due to the unique characteristic sword light, he was blinded for 5 seconds. The hero was confused when he saw this, after which he stood in the darkness, thinking that he could not see anything. A new window notified that the magic resistance skill was activated. Sun Jiun held the sword at arm's length. A sound was heard behind him. The spiritual eye skill was activated. Suddenly, the enemy's blade approached the back of the hero's head. Our guy managed to dodge, but he still received a cut. New windows reported that he received the achievement Avoidance of Blindness. Dexterity increased by 2, after which the swing of his sword left a bright trace. The darkness dissipated and the enemy could be seen. The darkening effect of the unique characteristic sword light ended. Sunhak pulled the blade back. A sweaty Sun Jiun looked at him, thinking about how his throat was almost cut. Looking closely at his opponent, the old man asked how he calculated the trajectory of the sword. New messages notified that the skill Instant Acceleration was activated. The skill Grace of the Wind was activated. Agility increased by 50%. The current stacking progress is 5/7. Sun Jiun touched the ground with his hand, then rushed forward. Sunhak prepared to attack. Their blades crossed, causing a release of energy. The touch occurred with the tips of the blades. After that, Sun Jiun turned his back to the enemy, so he tried to kick, but the old man stepped back. After that, he tried to strike with the sword. At that moment, Sunhak stopped the hero's hand, but the hero kicked the man's hand. It turned out that they blocked each other's weapons. Frowning, Sunhak noted that he saw that he was using some strange techniques. Looking at the enemy, the hero thought that despite his incredible height, their characteristics were essentially on the same level. Suddenly, the ground opened up beneath them. The man's eyes lit up, and he said that he would be serious from now on. The swing of his sword left a bright trace. Due to the unique characteristic of the sword light, Sun Jiun was blinded for 5 seconds. He found himself in the darkness again. The blue windows reported that the magic resistance skill was activated. The duration of vision loss was reduced to 2.5 seconds. The spiritual eye skill was activated. Bright traces were heading towards him from the darkness. Pulling the sword back, the hero thought that the speed of his strikes had increased. One of the traces passed very close. The system notified that the exclusive effect of the forged iron pendant, Steel Defense, was activated. The protective layer absorbs 10% of all physical damage. He was able to block another blow, but he still lost his arm. The pain resistance skill was activated. Looking at the wound, the hero thought about whether the steel defense was not enough to block his blow. Another notification that the darkening effect of the unique characteristic sword light has ended. Sunhak was opposite, swinging his blade. Rocks flew from under the hero's feet. Retreating, he turned around. Having destroyed one of the rocks, he threw it at the enemy, but the man noticed it. A swing of his blade split it in half. The hero moved, holding the severed limb in his teeth. This is how he managed to get behind the enemy. He turned around and noticed Sun Jiun. Already at this moment, the hero managed to restore the limb. Looking away, Sunhak said that regarding his recent techniques, he had already thought that he was a good martial artist, but all his techniques were simply borrowed from somewhere. Clenching his restored hand into a fist, the guy replied that the unique characteristic he used was also an ability obtained from the tower. Afterwards, new messages appeared. The skill Grace of the Wind has been activated. All speed has increased by 70%. The current stacking progress is 7/7. While using the ability, Sun Jiun asked the enemy with a smile, does he criticize others, but does not notice any sins in himself. He held the blade in front of himself, answering that he was using his tricks again. As a swordsman, relying on borrowed techniques is highly unacceptable, but our hero had already rushed to attack. He tried to strike, but the old man managed to block it. Looking at this with surprise, he wondered, then how about dying from a borrowed ability, and pressed his weapon even harder on his. Sunhack recalled the defeated enemies, thinking that until now he had performed a floor insertion dozens of times. Back then, blood was dripping from his sword. With this sword he cut down opponents from different worlds. He imagined how liquid flowed from the planet into the bowl. In particular, the people of the world called Earth were weak in terms of abilities in all respects. It was so bad that this place was called a honey jar. He stood there with his eyes closed. The challengers from Earth couldn't touch even a hair on his head. In addition, when using the unique attribute sword light that obscured the enemy's vision, a single sword in his hand was enough to deal with any of them. Now he dodged Sun Ji-Eun's attacks, thinking that this time too he was sure that history would repeat itself, after which he was able to retreat back. Gritting his teeth, he still received an injury. Ring marks appeared in the sky, so Sunhack retreated even further from Sun Ji-Eun. The hero took a deep breath. The old man was breathing heavily. More messages appeared above his head as he stood with his head down. Administrator White Crane Sword admires the young challenger. Administrator Beast of the North predicts his imminent defeat. Administrator Late Night Lords is interested in the young challenger. Administrator the Hero of the Black Islands was amazed by the skill of the young challenger. He looked up and glared at the boy. As his sword flared up, new messages appeared. The skill 1 strike, 2 skins activated. Attack speed doubles. The skill Lightning Sword Kai is activated. Lightning energy fills the sword. The skill 1 strike is activated. The cutting power of the sword is doubled for the next attack. The skill Nymph Walk is activated. Increases the user's movement speed by 2 times for 1 minute. Sun Ji-Eun smiled widely, noting that just a moment ago, the same one ink any techniques. The windows that appeared notified that the second floor implementation penalty was applied. All stats were reduced by 8. He cannot use some skills. The old man looked angry about this. The skill 1 strike, 2 skins was forcibly deactivated. The skill Lightning Sword Kai was forcibly deactivated. The cooldown of the unique characteristic Sword Light has ended. Activating the unique characteristic Sword Light. The hero was surrounded by shadows again. He thought that he was starting to get used to his pattern attacks. The spiritual eye skill was activated. Putting his hand behind his back, Sunhack opened his mouth wide, shouting that he would rip out all his insides. A bright beam was directed towards the hero. He prepared to attack, using the 3 absolute skill. 3 attacks are strengthened by the skill effect. Sun Ji-Eun gritted his teeth. After that, he swung his blade, leaving a bright trace. A new message appeared stating that the darkening effect of the unique characteristic sword light was over. The hero stood behind the old man. He was breathing heavily, and the enemy was motionless. After that, Sunhack's sword fell to the ground. The old man began to walk forward, but his body was trembling and a wound appeared on his belt. His eyes became larger from anger. He screamed that this could not be. Then blood gushed out of the wound, and he fell to the ground. The hero smiled as he was congratulated for breaking through the 9th floor of the Tower of Trials. Red lines stretched towards Sun Ji-Eun's hand. He had absorbed the spirit of the challenger Sunhack. Mastery increased by 27%. The hero looked at his hand, noting the increase in stats. Afterwards, new system messages appeared about breaking through the 9th floor of the Tower of Trials. The difficulty level and reward did not match. The reward content was completely revised. He thought that there was definitely something like this last time too. I wonder what kind of reward he would get this time. New messages notified that the revision was complete. Rewards would be issued sequentially. The skill 6th Sense C+ was created as a breakthrough reward. 30,000 points were received as a breakthrough reward. He received 1,000 SP as a bonus reward. Moved to the waiting room. Looking at the screen in front of him, the hero thought that the rank was much higher than the skill Beast Instinct, which was originally a reward. Afterwards, he headed to the portal, saying that he would look at the details in the waiting room. Before entering it, he saw new messages that Administrator White Crane Sword was impressed by his battle. Administrator Beast of the North was delighted by his battle. Administrator Late Night Devourer was watching his actions with interest. Administrator Hero of the Black Islands applauded his combat instinct. Sun Ji-Eun looked at them in surprise. There were more messages that the system expansion was starting and administrators would be able to watch the tests. He thought that if his memory served him correctly, there was a notification of this kind. So a smile appeared on his face when he decided that one way or another, many administrators were delighted with his fight. He felt a little satisfied that he had received at least some recognition. Sun Ji-Eun looked at the blue screens again. It said that Administrator Lord of Steel Blood condemned the excessive interest in the contractor. Administrator Lord of Steel Blood said that the contractor should not become obsessed with the increased attention. After that, there were more messages that Administrator White Crane Sword wanted to add power to the contractor's exclusive store and asked if he was willing to accept the offer. Sun Ji-Eun widened his eyes in surprise and wondered what this meant. The administrator was simply giving power. The hero looked at the screen again, and a notification appeared that Administrator Lord of Steel Blood said in a dissatisfied tone that he could accept the power. Then the hero wondered if he could just accept. Then a new message informed that Administrator Lord of Steel Blood said that there are cases where power is sponsored to gain the favor of contractors. Looking at the screen, Sun Jun wondered if there was any benefit to the favor of a candidate who had already made a contract. He wondered if there would be situations where they would have to face each other. Standing silently, the hero saw a message that Administrator White Crane Sword laughingly said that there would be many such situations in the future. The sun shone on the rocks. A notification appeared that Administrator Lord of Steel Blood said that the power provided would be so excellent that he would feel a certain burden. Then the hero thought again that the power was not that good, but at the same time they were trying to buy his favor with it. So this power was given to him because they expected something from him. After which, he tapped the screen, deciding that there was no need to doubt, and replied that he gratefully accepted the gift. You have accepted the power added by Administrator White Crane Sword. Another screen notified that the administrator of the White Crane Sword asked him to remember this kindness with a smile on his lips, and Sun Jun replied that yes, of course, he would be happy to use their gift. After exiting the portal, the system message is notified that the waiting room of the 10th floor had been entered. The system expansion is beginning. Access to the common areas is now possible. The light reflected from the hero's eye, he wondered about the common areas. Looking down, he wondered if the administrators could watch him here too. Then he opened his mouth and asked if they were still watching him, but only the walls and silence surrounded him. Then he brought his fist to his mouth and cleared his throat. Blue messages immediately appeared about the opening of the Strength category in the Contractor's exclusive store. Strength category. List a third. Strength Purity of Mind C acquired. Strength Steel Sola Plus. Strength King of Winter D Plus. Strength Sword Master Kai C Plus. Our hero was surprised by what he saw, after which he clicked on the screen. Then the description of the power of the Kai Sword Master C Plus opened. Price 1500 SP. Description: the Kai Sword is the result of converting the released Kai energy, which can only be used by first-class warriors, converting it into power. The Kai Sword is slightly more powerful than a normal sword, and when he receives this power, he will be able to strengthen the sword with energy such as mana or internal Kai energy. However, the mana consumption will increase proportionally to the duration of activation. Looking at the screen with interest, he realized that he can pour mana into the weapon and use the Kai Sword, saying that he was told that the power is so-so, but it looks very good. After that, he moved to the second page, saying that now he can check the second page. A new window opened their categories Power. List 2/3. Power Bone Reconstruction C+. Power Steel Blood Sword. A Power Hand of Death B. Looking at the new blue messages, the hero saw the description of the Power Bone Reconstruction C+. Price 1500 forks. Description: bone structure can be reconstructed for any martial art. All stats increase by 2. Strength Blood Steel Sword. Price 5000 forks. Description: able to summon a low mana blood steel sword. The user's mana is not consumed. However, only one blood steel sword can be used. Strength Hand of Death V. Price 2000 forks. Description: the yin and black magic element is activated, causing damage and slight decomposition of the body. He glanced at the information about the funds, noting that he only had 2000 forks. Sun Jun imagined himself covered in golden light, deciding that the power he could buy now was bone reconstruction. His weapon was surrounded by the blue glow of the Kai Sword Master ability. This was one of the two. Looking at the screen, he wondered what to do. Maybe he should save up a little more forks. After which he raised his hand, thinking that the old man Sunhack he had just met on the 9th floor was also a crazy monster. So, tapping the screen, he thought that in order not to die at the hands of such bastards, it was important to buy more powers first. A new notification appeared, saying that he had bought the power of Sword Master Kai. 1500 forge points would be deducted. The sword in his hand shone brightly. He had obtained the power of Sword Master Kai. After swinging it a few times, the hero said that the triple absolute skill also uses mana, but the feeling was completely different. Waves crashed against the stone. Sun Jun thought about how if the mana flowing into the sword instantly like a wave was called the triple absolute skill. The river flowed along the riverbed, but perhaps the power of Sword Master Kai should be compared to a stream of water flowing over the sword. Afterwards, the hero looked at his weapon in surprise when notifications appeared that 1 minute had passed since the activation of the Kai Sword Master power. Increases mana consumption by 2%. 2 minutes had passed since the activation of the Kai Sword Master power. Increases mana consumption by 4%. Every minute, mana consumption increases by 2%. In about 50 minutes, mana consumption will increase by 100%. Lowering the sword, the glow began to dissolve. The Kai Sword Master power was deactivated. The hero realized that he must distribute his mana well when using this power. Tapping the screen again, he said that the reward for the 9th floor was the 6th sense skill. The description opened. Skill 6th sense C+. Effect: instincts are sharpened to such an extent that they become a 6th sense through which you can make complex conclusions. He thought, does that mean his intuition will improve? Sunjun put his hand to his chin, thinking that being able to make conclusions based on instinct seemed like a pretty useful skill. Then the community tab appeared on the screen, and he thought that he should check if there were any mentions of common areas. There were several profiles that left messages. Susie went to the common area, and there were many foreigners. She thought the common area was a shared space with people from other countries. Maximum level swordsman just got here. What kind of place is this? What was the purpose of this? On-chan Sok asked, what is the exchange between applicants? First of all, it is worth noting that foreign speech is automatically translated. Great Life wrote that this is some kind of madness. He saw an S-rank hunter from Japan. What the hell is going on here? Chushnya wrote that an S-rank hunter was also dragged into the tower. Damn, his hopes are dashed. Master of martial arts, I figured out a little about what the common areas are for. As soon as he arrived here, he was bombarded with messages from the administrators. BRZD asked why he was the only one bombarded with messages. He didn't receive any. Master of martial arts replied that maybe it was because he was ranked 71st. Running his finger across the screen, the hero realized that there were a lot of comments about the common areas that had been added to the 10th floor. Suddenly, something caught his attention. The hero opened his mouth in surprise. The message said that just now, in the common area, a foreigner asked him if he wanted to exchange the power of his administrator. Is it possible to exchange powers? Looking at the information on the screen again, the hero reasoned that there was an opportunity to personally see many applicants and also exchange powers. A smile appeared on his face when he wondered if he could go on reconnaissance himself then. A new message appeared about moving to the common area on the 10th floor. A view of the open space opened up in front of the guy with green eyes. Delighted by this, he realized that this was the common area. Looking forward with excitement, he thought about how he even used the question ticket to learn as much as he could about this place, so he was going to make the most of it before heading back. Someone was watching him as he walked along the forest path. Several people were standing in the forest. One of them said that the bastard seemed to be a hunter from Korea. His comrade supported him, saying that right, this was a Korean O-rank hunter. He remembered seeing his profile. A smile appeared on the bandit's face when he said that he was a strong hunter and he was constantly worried about how his behavior always left much to be desired. Then his eyes filled with a red light from the words, "It was okay to kill outside the common area, right?" Meanwhile, the boy was walking calmly along the forest. Suddenly, red shadows lowered him to the ground, and there were messages that the mana consumption rate increased by 100% due to the effect of the unique characteristic weakening light. Due to the effect of the unique characteristic territory restriction, all stats are reduced by 20%. Under the effect of the unique characteristic Eye of Terror, part of his body is paralyzed. The boy tried to move his finger, then he turned his head behind him. A group of bandits had gathered there, and he asked what they were doing. Their leader licked his blade, telling the boy that the victim was one of the strongest Korean hunters, but he had no idea what was happening now. Gritting his teeth, he cursed and thought about how they were not on a trial, but they were even here robbing. Unable to move in front of them, he heard them stop. The purple-haired girl waved her hand and asked them if they were sure they could handle the consequences. If they didn't stop right now, she would turn on the community function to report their actions to others. The bandit leader was confused. Standing up, he still agreed. Then he smiled evilly and said that if she took off her clothes, he would think about it. Putting the blade on her back, he also said that if she dropped all her items, then so be it, maybe he would have mercy and leave one of them alive. The girl blushed with indignation and asked what this meant. Then the bandit extended his hand, asking if she could help him. But he turned around, hearing something. Sun Jiun was passing by them. Looking at him, the bandit asked, "Who the hell is that bastard?" Sun Jiun was standing with his back to them when they called out to him. The hero only turned his head. Then he took off his hood and asked again if he had been told that. Standing next to the prisoner, the bandit said yes. Afterwards, all the criminals had sinister smiles when he asked the question, "You are also Korean, right?" After which the bandits used their abilities on the hero. He calmly looked at the approaching shadows, and, opening his mouth, he simply noted that he wanted to quietly pass by. Stretching his hand in front of him, he was surrounded by a glow. Notifications appeared that the force breakthrough skill was activated. The magic resistance skill was activated. The effect of increasing mana consumption by 100% was cancelled. The decrease in all stats by 20% was cancelled. Paralyzing effects applied to body parts are removed. This shocked the bandit. Opening a blue screen, Sun Jiun took out a blade. Then he took it aside, saying that he was not the one who started it. The instant acceleration skill was activated. Sun Jun rushed at the enemies. They were shocked by such speed. The hero quickly struck. One of the bandits used an ice shield. Others were bleeding from their wounds. With a satisfied smile, the hero pulled his fist back and struck the barrier. The girl and the boy were shocked. The bandit fell to the ground. Sun Jun destroyed the barrier with one blow. The bandit stretched out his hand and screamed that he was wrong. But Sun Jun struck him in the neck when he asked for mercy. New messages appeared on the red background saying that he had absorbed the player's spirit. And then 2 more. Mastery increased by 6.4%. The boy with green eyes stood up from the ground. Folding her arms, the girl said that she should have helped, but the battle ended faster than she could have thought. Our hero replied that everything was fine, that he should not worry about it and go on his way. Bowing, she thanked him and said goodbye. Looking at his savior, the boy asked if he was a ranker by any chance. Turning to him, Sun Jun replied that in a way it could be said that way, thinking about how he had always been in the top 10 players in the final rankings. Then the saved man smiled, saying that it was clear it was a great honor for him to meet him. Thanks to him, he survived. Looking at him, the hero thought that it seemed to him that they wanted to kill him, so, getting rid of the problem that had fallen on him, he simply helped him along the way, but he replied that it was nothing special, so now he could go about his business. Sun Jun had already turned around and said goodbye to the stranger, but the stranger asked him to wait. The hero looked over his shoulder. The guy pointed at the dead bandits, asking him to leave the corpses of those applicants with him. Sun Jun looked at his interlocutor in confusion and asked why. The man happily smiled and replied that if he gave him those corpses, as well as for saving his life, he would pay him by giving him power. Sun Jun looked interested. Gluttony, a dark light came out from his hand. The corpses of the bandits were sucked into his hand. Wiping his forehead, the guy said that it was not bad. Smiling again, the interlocutor said that, so, as promised, he would give him power. A new message appeared that the hero accepted the power added by the administrator. Sun Jun looked at the monitor with a smile, reading that the Power Steel Wings was added to the power category of the exclusive contractor store, and thought that he did not expect to get another power. Visualizing the magical wings on his back, the administrator said that this is a power that allows you to create wings on your back with the ability to levitate. If he buys this power with So, he will be able to use it right away. Sun Jun smiled happily and thanked the interlocutor, thinking that as soon as he returns to the waiting room, he will immediately try this power in action. But then several new messages appeared in front of the hero, saying that the administrator of the White Crane Sword was saying not to bother the applicant who had been noticed by him. Administrator Gourmet, is he outraged that business ethics are not observed to such an extent? Administrator Steelblood is unhappy with the one hanging around his contractors. Administrator Black Devil is watching the fight between these three with interest. He did not understand what the administrators had started among themselves. Looking at this, the hero thought that seeing how the competition between the administrators flares up, one can confidently say that they clearly want to get something from the applicants. Well, he will just get to the bottom of the truth step by step. The two guys continued on their way through the forest. Turning to his companion, the administrator said that the common area is divided into an arena, an auction zone, and a game zone. And in addition to these well-known facts, he can share much more interesting information. The hero looked at him as he continued to explain that the other dimensional worlds that had been revealed so far through the floor embedding process were Ares, Murim, and Kellion, so they could only encounter these three dimensions when it came to floor embedding. He imagined a warrior kneeling before another. The challengers from the Ares world placed great importance on chivalry. The samurai held his sword. The Murim challengers were similar to them, but a little more aggressive. Sun Jun narrowed his eyes and thought about what it meant that the Black Knight was from the Ares world and Sunhak was from Murim. He also introduced the representatives of the other races, saying that he had heard that Kellion was a world of races such as elves, fairies, and beastmen.